I'm about to tier rank over 100 classic novels so we can kick off a literary renaissance. And this is the most definitive guide to classic novels anywhere on YouTube. I'm about to tell you what you need to read so you can get into classic novels and what we need to read as a collective so we can revive literature. Because there are countless classics that we had to read in school that all the lit bros say, you need to read this, that are going to do nothing to get the energy back into the heart of readers again. And today, we're going to go all the way because I'm not scared to make some hot takes. I'm not scared to confront the crap that is sometimes shoved down our throat by lovers of the classics. And so, if you do not already know, my name is Ian, and here on Right Conscious, we talk about the best books and the best authors of all time. I also help writers activate so we can kick off a literary renaissance. And so, if you want to join the struggle, if you want to join this push, then I want you guys to subscribe. I want you to like the video. I want you to comment. I want you to tell me where I was right and where I was wrong, because there's going to be a lot of ratings today. And so you guys already know where we're starting. And is this energy not high enough? Because I feel like I got to get my dogs going out there. Rah, rah, rah. Let's go. So, first novel of the day. You guys already know it's a series. And now, in 2026, I would say that this is a classic novel. Of course, we have to rank, and this is going to piss some people off, The Lord of the Rings. I'm going to have to put it all the way down here at a D. Just joking, everyone. It is up at the S tier. And if you guys have ever heard someone out there say, Tolkien's for little boys, The Lord of the Rings isn't that good, then I'm sorry that you had to hear that. Because anytime there's something out there that's objectively good, I'm gonna make a stand right here, everyone. I'm going to say something that when someone watches the ballet Swan Lake, very rarely will you hear someone say, that wasn't very good, that sucked. Everyone who watches Swan Lake, that is a real human, that has had real experiences and experiences real emotion and isn't some locked up internet troll or weirdo who goes to a Swan Lake ballet that's very well produced and watches it, will come away saying, that was really, really good. Oh my God, that was Tchaikovsky's first ballet? Damn. But for some reason in the world of literature, we've been programmed, especially in the school system, to think that art is subjective, that some people may like this book but not like other books. But I am here to say that there is a level of quality that exists that if you know actually how to read, maybe it's not your favorite book, but you need to acknowledge that this is a masterpiece. Everything that I'm going to put in the S tier today is a objective masterpiece. The Lord of the Rings, everyone, is an objective masterpiece. Let's talk about any category. Style, world building, characterization. Yeah, I get it. It's fantasy. Yeah, I get it. It was maybe written for the boys. It was written for a different time. The love stories, the display of trauma. My God, the talk of actual honorable qualities. You guys, I was a teacher for 8 years. Not once in any classroom, in any school that I taught, other than me maybe sometimes trying to sneak it in, was there anything taught about honor, respect? Not in that way, like respect your parents, yeah, respect the government. No, like the virtues of being a human, high ideals, the stuff that actually matters, the stuff that was lost, ethics, morality. None of that was ever taught, and no one is learning that in public schools anymore. The way that The Lord of the Rings balances everything without religion, without sex, showing heroics, honor, virtue, evil, all these different things simultaneously at once while drawing you in is absolutely insane. The way it blends poetry and song, all these different things that are lost. We don't memorize poetry. We don't break out in song anymore. Do you guys know that the men that came back from World War I, they would sing songs together? Anybody ever see Peaky Blinders? You know, they sung. We don't sing anymore. We don't have anything. We have nothing. We sing along to a song by Kendrick Lamar or Taylor Swift that was co-written by 20 ghostwriters and produced by 20 ghost producers and was made to just make us feel just kind of neutral and like, yeah. No, it's literally connected to nothing. You could take almost any aspect, any book, any section of the Lord of the Rings, whether it's the Ents, whether it's our boy Boromir, and get something from it. Like, for instance, many of us have been abandoned by our father. We have been cosmically abandoned. Feel like we've been abandoned by our government. We feel like we have no accurate representation. We have no real connection. Sometimes we have no parental connection. We're out here in the world with a million vices, with a million rings out here for the taking. We can just grab it. We can just smack that hobbit and grab the ring, whether it's eating bad food, whether it's pornography, whether it's just endless drug use, online gambling, whatever it is. There's a million ways for us to get roped in. And this book, just in this one instance, in this one little category, is an absolute masterclass in talking about desire and manipulation and so many different things. So that's why The Lord of the Rings is an S tier. It literally functions almost perfectly. Like, it's hard to believe that, Tolkien was just writing this as a side gig. And so I can't spend a million hours on each book. I'll do more. I have Lord of the Rings content if you look it up. All right, moving on to our next novel. So next up we have Gabriel Garcia Marquez's 100 Years of Solitude. And I'm going to put this down here in a C, everyone. Uh-oh. And I feel like Marquez is someone that you are supposed to like, because guess what? I'm a fan of magical realism. I love Borges. I love Murakami. I love slipstream fiction. I like to write magical realism. I like to take not as much anymore, but I've taken the psychedelics. I understand the spiritual components of reality, but 100 Years of Solitude, in my opinion, is pretty overrated in that category, and in general is not that serious of literature on a transformative level, and on a stylistic level, there is so much better stuff out there when it comes to magical realism. You should read it at some point. It should be on your list. That's why it's not here in the D category, but it is a little bit unconnected. It is a little bit loose. In general, magical realism isn't supposed to maybe push some grand narrative, push some grand message, but it's supposed to make you feel like there is a coherent spiritual world out there. And I get that the incoherence of the slipstreamness in 100 Years of Solitude is part of the purpose, but the genre has definitely evolved. I could sit down here and say that, we could read Malazan, Book of the Fallen, Gene Wolfe's Book of the New Sun, and talk that there's been an evolution of fantasy, but it's a stone's throw away from The Lord of the Rings and some of the other classics in fantasy. I mean, depending even on whatever period you're in, it's a nice progression, but everything's somewhat connected. But I feel like there has been explosions, whether it's Ben Okri or someone else, in the realm of magical realism. Carlos Fuentes, go read Aura, go read The Death of Artemio Cruz, go read Pedro Perdomo, which inspired Marquez. I mean, you can go read some of these other people, and I would say that they are like a catapult away from this novel, even though I have a deep affinity for it. And when I first read it, I was like, oh crap, I've never read anything like before. I read it when I was high school, but nonetheless, it's got to be down here in the C category. Next up, we have The Trial by Franz Kafka, and I'm going to throw this here at an A, because how many authors out there have a term named after them? And that's not why it's getting an A. But when we think of Kafka, it's what? That's Kafka-esque. And what's crazy about Kafka is he was so influential, even though this works like The Trial and The Castle were unfinished. They were, not even close to being finished in terms of drafting, but still read wonderfully, still impact you. We just read this in the Right Conscious Book Club, and everyone loved it. Everyone took away something from The Trial. It was the ultimate vision on modern alienation, the bureaucratic nightmare we've all entered, the arena of exploitation that we are all in. We think that because we are all connected and that we are all, whether it's online or in the world, and we've all been educated, that we have evolved, right? But then you look at the Epstein files and everything going on with all that, and you're like, wait, but this novel actually, The Trial talks about all of that. It talks about the sexual exploitation of women through people in the courts and through people in power and crazy stuff, and everyone having to turn a blind eye. It talks about all these different elements that people back when Kafka wrote this were not hip to yet. And if they were, they didn't have the balls or didn't have the means to be able to write something like that. And so Kafka in general, I think that this is the only book that we are going to be writing today, has to slip up here into the A category, in my humble opinion. I think if you had more time, then I'm sure, another 2 decades to live or so, I'm sure this would be up in the S categories. So if you want to read classic novels like The Trial, many of the others on this list with a group, the Right Conscious Book Club is the most active book club in the world. We are also the dopest. In 2026, we are reading 28 transformative novels together, many of which are on this list today. And my goal is to help create a literary renaissance, and that's why I want to help you not just finish books, but understand them better. The book club is hosted on Substack, where I also post literature and writing course content. I have hundreds of hours of content that are deep dives into books, literary culture, writing, and so much more over on Substack. I also do free live streams and free content over there, post my writing for free if you want to check out what I'm doing. And so I encourage you guys to go down to the link in the description below if you want to support me and join a really sick group of readers and writers over on Substack. I have assembled a group of really smart people that dive super deep into literature, are putting out really good writing. And so if you want to meet other people who range from beginners into reading to literal PhDs, then go check me out over on Substack, and you are supporting me. Another way to support me, if you don't care about that, is of course picking up some Right Conscious merch. Because right now I got some survivor's guilt for whoever didn't make it through. I have over 50 t-shirt designs that are all related to books or authors over on my website, rightconscious.com. You can find that link down in the description below. I'm going to be releasing some sick new merch soon. And so check it out whenever you see this. I'll always be releasing new stuff. And thank you guys for the support. And for the rest of this video, you will not be hearing any other ads. So thank you for sitting through this and have a great time. So next up, we have J.D. Salinger's The Catcher in the Rye, which I'm going to put down here in the C category. So the only reason that I would say this is a revered book is, first of all, many people were forced to read this, and also that this alienated, angsty teenager or young man that sees the hypocrisy of the modern adult world has kind of become a trope. It's a thing that is easy to connect to, but so is Rupi Kaur's work. So is Charles Bukowski's work. Like, oh, I'm just going to drink my life away. Nothing matters. I'm just a sad boy. Like, I'm an artist and, screw it all. Like, those type of malignant mentalities aren't doing anything for anybody. And if you are pushing that onto the world, then you are somewhat, no offense, a waste of space, especially in comparison to your highest potential, even just your average potential. Running that playbook isn't that good. And when I look at the group of books, we're going to be looking at some books today, everybody, that run this same alienated, sad boy, teenager archetype. And when I'm looking at them, The Catcher in the Rye is definitely not one of the stronger picks. I get it. It's an American classic if you're from America. But in general, I also think that this one has a problem in the sense that many people read this when they are too young, and I think that's why a lot of the hate kind of gets thrown at it. I've sadly had to read this multiple times. One of the reasons why is because for a while at the school I was at, they forced terrible teaching situation. You had to read you had to teach on a set curriculum. And so this was in the curriculum, and one of the only reasons it was good is because I could just call the boys, like, stop being such a Holden, bro. Like, why don't you bring that Anton Chigurh energy to the table, if you guys know what I mean. But stylistically, The Catcher in the Rye also isn't that strong. Yes, it actually accurately captures angst, but here's a secret for you guys. If you're a one-hit wonder, I know that Salinger wrote more. Franny and Zoe's also fun, but when I look at this list, I like to function on a bell curve. And honestly, when I'm looking at this list of novels, The Catcher in the Rye definitely has to be a D, because there aren't, out of these 100 books, there aren't many that are worse than it. And if I'm going to be putting 10 or so books in the D, Catcher in the Rye is absolutely down there. So you may be saying right now, well, Ian, what's one of these supposed novels that talks about angst that's better? And I would say that's The Stranger by Camus. So The Stranger by Camus is obviously not about a teenager living in New York City. It's about almost an adolescent-minded man, Meursault, whose mother just died, and he decides to reject caring about her. He kind of rejects love and almost everything, work and other things. It's such a weird, thinking about the old world is weird. Like, there are people that, like, back in the day that just, had a little bit of money or working on jobs, and they were just, like, living this artistic lifestyle. And now, like, in the city I'm in, if I wanted to get in, like, the worst apartment, like a 1-bedroom studio that was, like, not, like, probably moldy, we're talking at least $1,000. You have to actually like work almost to be like, sustaining yourself. And so this kind of laid back mentality from what I've seen is mostly just from people who like live with their parents still, which is fine. But so The Stranger is an absolute masterpiece, much more so than The Catcher in the Rye in terms of transformative elements, because just in sheer numbers, The Stranger has transformed tens of millions of people. It has given them the existential bug. It has given them the freedom, whether it's through negative theology, whether it's through realizing I don't want to be like Meursault, I don't want to be disconnected, but I want to attain some of the freedom that he has, or just totally disconnecting and maybe moving away from like Christianity or some of this stuff. Pushing back against your parents like Holden does in The Catcher in the Rye just isn't strong enough. And as a writer now, when I look at The Stranger, what I see is that Camus mastered this idea of language overlay, concrete desire, and significant history very well. Because Meursault has no desire. How can you have an arc? How can you have characterization if you have no desire? How can you have personality through text if all you want to do is just lay on the beach, have sex and smoke cigs all day and, grab a meal? And when we think of the idea of the novel, what a novel is a vehicle for desire. We have these characters that are pursuing a goal or running away from something or something like that. But in The Stranger, Camus does, throws all of that out. And what's genius about this novel, is that Meursault, through this attitude, throughout him rejecting his history, any form of personality, and any form of desire, when he comes up against religion, when he comes up against the courts, when he comes up against society and he becomes a public spectacle, he realizes that all these things force you to feel me. They force us to feel like they are meaningful, like religion and like our government, like they're here to save us. Yes. And I think a line in this novel, I'm paraphrasing it, is that Meursault says, "I decided to open myself up to the gentle indifference of the world." Camus saw through the bureaucratic maze that Kafka talks about and gave us a flat, consistent, minimal text that's actually existentially maximalist. So very good stuff. That's why I'm throwing it there at a B. It does have problems. It's not like some masterpiece, but it's really good and has been very effective in changing a lot of people, including myself. And so next we have Virginia Woolf's To the Lighthouse, and I'm going to throw this down here at a C. And now that we're talking about Virginia Woolf, who's on my shirt right here, does anyone else out there have survivor's guilt? Well, if you guys want to get some sick t-shirts, then all you have to do and support me, all you have to do is go to rightconscious.com and you can make the streets lit and represent. So let's go, everyone. And so unfortunately, even though I like the contribution Woolf made to this t-shirt, I have to put her down here at a C because Virginia Woolf is just, I'll just say it, she's being shoved down our throat because there is this group of modernist novelists, the Hemingway, the Joyces, the Proust, the Henry Millers, the whoever, right? And I guess society, or for whatever reason, Woolf got put into that caliber of writing. And in my opinion, as I'm about to explain, she is not. And that's not to say that female modernist writers weren't good. Jean Rhys, the novelist, we'll talk about her maybe in today's video. Denise Levertov, Marianne Moore, Anais Nin, Hilda Doolittle, There's like all these modernist authors that I feel like were in the game and actually progressing the game. And I definitely don't feel that way about Woolf. Here's why. Woolf was basically taking modernist techniques like stream of consciousness and but while using Victorian sentiment. She did not tap into the idea of the abolition of romantic time, which is the core of modernist literature. What she did was bring Victorian sentimentality to the table with a couple new tricks, which I'm sure at the time was maybe appreciated, but in retrospect, I view Victorian literature, maybe as we'll talk about today, as much lower than modernist literature, and in general, kind of just navel gazing. And Woolf is what we could call soft modernism because within her work, she's trying to create a transparent nature to it so that we see the glow, the glow of the lake, the shade of the room, all these different things. But when you look at her contemporaries, whether that's Proust, whether that's Joyce or someone else, they are literally like Joyce would get stopwatches and click and imagine people walking or time people walking. So when he would write Ulysses or something like that, everything within the novel was functioning on a grid all at the same time, like super high level stuff. Woolf is existing only in the present. Modernism and the highest ideals and the great texts are existing in a conversation with every other time in history. And in my opinion, To the Lighthouse, Mrs. Dalloway, these works do not live up to that hype at all. They are beautifully written, they are very nice, but in general are very disappointing when compared to other modernist work, especially when you're kind of looking for something more. So, the conversation to bring her higher would be, did Woolf actually capture this idea, this Victorian idea of sincerity? And in general, she does a little bit, but not very much. So speaking of Marcel Proust, we have Swann's Way in here, and I'm going to throw this up here in the A category. I'll even throw it above Kafka. And so, do you guys remember earlier when I was talking about Boromir? Do you guys remember that? Are we already way too far gone? Are you guys still with me? Let me know down in the comment section below if you guys have made it this far, because I'm going to bring the energy all the way. And I'm going to make you guys laugh right now. Like, I'm going to say it. So when I first read Swann's Way, you guys, I was recommended it by a professor, and he said, you need to read this, like, in full. And so, of course, I start to read Proust, and it's boring, right? I'm like, oh my God. And during this time, though, for the love of God, I had two different things going on for me. I was taking caffeine pills. So every day I would be taking about 600 milligrams of caffeine pills. And if you have never taken caffeine pills before and you drink coffee, go order some on Amazon right now. Your cup of coffee, the same if you take 100 milligrams of coffee or tea and you compare it to 100 milligrams of the caffeine pill, the caffeine pill is going to hit a lot harder, like twice as hard, bro. I just broed you. It's a lot. And so I was just zoinked out on caffeine. I haven't had caffeine since April of 2020 or March of 2020, everyone. Not a milligram, no tea, no chocolate. Anyway. And so I was deep in the world of caffeine, though. And so at the same time, everyone, I'm reading Marcel Proust, and I was on a streak, everyone. I was single. I'm going to speak to all my guys out there. I'm going to get a little bit TMI right here, you guys. I was trying to be the no-fap king. I was going for weeks, everybody. The brahmacharian energy was lifting out of my soul. But something started to happen, everybody. I started to take the ring occasionally like Boromir. I started, to smack the hobbits, as I was talking about earlier. But during this period, I was the yogic king, and I hadn't met my wife yet. I was feeling that bodhisattva caffeine pill energy, and that's how I got through Swann's Way. That's how I got through In Search of Lost Time. Without that, shout out to my boy Ram if he's listening right now. Salute to you, my man. Hope your PhD is going good. Without that, and without my boy also reading it at the same time and talking, he didn't need any of the extreme tactics to get through it, but that's why he's getting a PhD and your boy's out here going crazy. So back to Marcel Proust, though. Where are you getting this, you guys? What other booktubers making the Boromir Swann's Way caffeine pill no-fap connection or an equivalent? Let's go. Just wait until I connect Virginia Woolf, Your Mom, and Frankenstein, because you already know that's coming down the pipeline very, very soon. So one of the genius things about Proust is that he mastered this idea of what I don't call it this. There's a book on modernism. I think it's called The Pound Era that I recently read and I'm talking about over on Substack. But there's this idea of internalized time that broke open in modernism, which is in older novels before modernism, before Proust. People, if 20 years would pass, the author would say 20 years later or something like that. But Proust realized that we don't function that way, right? Like we don't, it just doesn't, the brain doesn't work like that. And he knew that our conception of time is very elastic in the sense that when I think of these magical moments in my life, right, I could think of almost every single detail in certain nights of my life from almost A to Z. There might be a little bit of fuzzy things, but when I think about what I did last Thursday, I might not be able to get almost anything out of it. Like, it would take me a while and it would be somewhat fuzzy. When I sometimes even think of years of my life, it can be fuzzy. But when I think of other times, when I think of times when I was supremely focused and like very much connected, it feels like it's worlds. And with Proust, he will spend 200 pages on a party, you guys, and then he'll spend a sentence skipping 10 years. And what Proust showed is that we are fragmented beings and that our life isn't linear and that there is a methodology to sew it together. Now that I'm in my 30s, how I reflect on my life from, as when I became conscious for the first time, it's a temple of memory, right? Of these things, and to interact with it and to worship it and to work with it is a very interesting thing. Like it's somewhat hard, and there are levels to the game. There are levels to the internal world, and Proust brought that out, and that's why it's an A. It can be boring to read. It can be very transformative, but I think there's a gatekeeping element to it, and like I said, if your boy had to go as deep as he had to go with extracurricular research to get through Proust, then let's go. So next up we have Don Quixote, which I'm going to put up here at a B. And what's interesting though is that I like all these books on this list. Like I can read Catcher in the Rye and have a really good time, and or Virginia Woolf to the Lighthouse. But like I said, we're giving some rankings here. So this one may come in a little controversial, but I think obviously it's how we rank it. Like, do we rank influence? How high do we rank influence? If we're talking about influence, Don Quixote is one of the most influential novels of all time, changed the entire game. In terms of modern readability, it's actually pretty readable. It's actually a really fun read. It's actually really good for writers, especially to kind of see some of the raw archetypal elements of the modern novel, to kind of, study and stuff. That's what I've always believed, at least. But I do find myself somewhat slogging through the work. I feel like Don Quixote has a lot of lessons, but not really as strong or tangible. I'll throw it in front of The Stranger for sure. But, and I'll be revising picks along the way as the board kind of fills out. This is all just kind of coming from intuition and what I feel. But I like Don Quixote, but in terms of modern transformative practicality, you can pull some stuff out, but it's not as strong. And unfortunately, with many of these classics, like it just depends. What's a classic, right? Like this is our first true classic of the day so far. I'm working with a list of like 55 books, and I'm going to add like 50 more once we get through these. So some are a little bit more recent, seemingly written in like the 1960s, but nonetheless, classic novels from, the 18th, 17th century, or even before that. If we get to really, some of that stuff, I feel like is going to have a little bit of a harder time because it's being compared to stuff that was written in a much different time. Next up, we have Lolita, which is absolutely an S tier book. This novel obviously has a bad reputation, but it's only by people who haven't read the book. This book is not even explicit about anything that goes on. Like, really, it speaks about, the absolutely disgusting stuff metaphorically, but what Lolita really is a frame novel. Lolita is the greatest frame novel ever written, in my opinion. There is no better novel than it in terms of framing. The novel is an attempt by Nabokov. It isn't an attempt to glorify child exploitation or anything like that. It's actually an attempt to show how this idea of the artist and language and this persona of the artist is used to manipulate the public. And with the Epstein files, we've seen this even with scientists, like, all these Lawrence Krauss and all these scientists that were involved, with like the Santa Fe Institute, all these people, they this idea of the scientist, the artist or whatever, can shield who the actual person is underneath. And that's what Nabokov is trying to do. The foreword of this is written by a psychiatrist that doesn't exist and is, talking about, our main character, Humbert, and saying about him, like, this guy is a great guy. Like, this is so nice to study and all this stuff, but he's not, like, these memoirs, like, he's writing about it like it's not about what it is. And throughout the novel, because this character who's writing in this kind of after the fact form to us, it literally is breaking the fourth wall and mentioning the reader. The reader, if you're reading this, like, there's all these injunctions that are, what it does and what's genius is it's not trying to convince you that child exploitation is bad directly. Like, what Lolita does is make you sympathize with the main character, the exploiter, in other ways not related to any of that. So then suddenly you're thinking, like, why am I sympathizing for this guy? It starts moving. It picks the most extreme and horrific topic, doesn't really talk about it, and starts messing with your head and keeps you on guard, and is doing it with Nabokov, who's one of the great greatest stylists of all time, some of the greatest writing and just prose on the page of all time, just insanity. Just go read the first page. It's like, oh my God, you can feel the electricity. It's not just in Lolita. It's in every single book in Nabokov's especially great run, you know, with Speak Memory, Pin, and Pale Fire. And so Lolita, you know, I don't see any of those other books, but I would say whether we're talking about Speak Memory, Pale Fire, or Pin, you know, that's one of the greatest groups of novels ever pushed out in a decade by anyone. And Nabokov definitely is an S-tier author. Don't listen to the hype, everyone. Like, literally, just read him. Read it. So next up we have George Orwell's 1984? Yeah, 1984. I'm going to throw this down here in the D category. Once again, I ask myself, okay, how many people do I know who have read 1984 that had a totally different conception of the world in the long term or as an adult? We all know that the government's screwing you. We all know, you know, when people figured out with like the, Edward Snowden, that they were tapping into our phones and listening to us, I remember laughing. I was like in high school, I was like, do you guys not real? Of course they're doing that. Do you guys think that the Patriot Act started all this? Do you guys know how long we've been being watched and exploited and experimented on? Since the dawn of civilization, everyone. You think that just, we have freedom of speech. That isn't really freedom of speech, you know? you could, you know, be totally shut down in our society for the things you say, even if you live in America. Like, so 1984 necessarily isn't really tilling on new ground. I think back in the day, obviously it was a really big deal. And it's a good book. Once again, it's something that I think is like nice. But when I look at like Catcher in the Rye in 1984, like, what are you really learning? What are you really transforming through this? When I look at the style, you know, Orwell's a nice stylist, you know, he's a good writer or whatever, but there's not the type of depth that you need. And there's not, you know, that I've seen easily in other, like, even Russian dystopic novels, like Yevgeny Zamyadin's We, which was written in like the 1920s. I just talked about in my ranking classic Russian novel list. Inspired 1984, and I would say is almost just as good, even though it was written decades before. And so I would say that 1984 has been read very widely and is generally overrated in terms of classics. Like, if we want to talk about anti-government sentiment and like building that within you and talking about the control system, we can talk about a lot of other novels that, in my opinion, do that a lot better. And that's coming from someone that was mind blown by this when I read it in the 8th grade, like, oh my God. So next we have William Faulkner's As I Lay Dying. And actually we have a couple, we'll just rank all Faulkner's novels really fast. We have Absalom, which I'll throw in here at an A. We'll throw that up at the top. We'll throw As I Lay Dying down here at the B. And then I think we also have The Sound and the Fury, which I will put up here in first place. And so, you know, Absalom could also be up in the S category, but I'll have a little bit of parody. So we'll first start with As I Lay Dying, which I love that novel. That novel is really fun. But I would say that, first of all, he wrote it way too fast. He finished that in 6 weeks. That's one draft, almost no edits. He just worked on it when he was working at the coal plant or electricity plant or wherever he was at. He did it in one go. And even though it was innovative and had that spark of energy, I would say it feels somewhat controlled. It feels somewhat contrived. Faulkner is basically showing off his talents. He says, I can create this nice plot device of this family, this dysfunctional family, you know, delivering this casket. I can, have these polyphonic voices all coming in and doing all this, but in general, it's still limited. It's like, it was really him displaying what he could do, really kind of pushing himself out. But I feel like with the, when we move on to The Sound and the Fury, we're working with a total other ballgame and actually the highest level of that idea of the abolition of romantic time and these modernist ideals I was talking about before. Pure control. And both novels, all novels, I should say, that are taking place in the South are perfect because when we think of time, when we think about the effects of the American Civil War, and one could say the failure of Reconstruction and all these different things, and Jim Crow, and the legacy of all this stuff kind of impacting and moving along, it's almost genius. It's these multi-generational, transgenerational trauma and these psychic wounds and with the insanity of the South all kind of put together. And in The Sound and the Fury, it's basically about the collapse, if you don't know, of a Southern family. And it's done in an insane way that's very internal, but it's all patchwork. It's all trying to figure out through fragments what exactly happened over different courses of time. And it's hard to figure out, it's something I reflect now on now that I'm older, you guys. Like some relations with some of my family members, extended, are not perfect anymore. And I sometimes sit back and wonder, how did this happen? How do some of these things, or with my friends, how did we get to this point? Like what exactly happened? And we were in a pressure cooker. Nothing was happening. And I'm sure you could relate to this. I wasn't living in a mythic land with, all this crazy stuff going on. But even the own pain and tragedy I have about losing and having evolving relationships, usually toward the negative with certain family members and friends is crazy. And Faulkner takes that to the highest level, in my opinion, with some of the greatest prose of all time, with some of the greatest Oxford English Dictionary style and run-on sentences. Absolutely wonderful. And in Absalom, it's a little bit, it's somewhat of a similar story. It's people trying to put together this story of this guy, Thomas Sutpen, who basically built this empire in the South, and then it all unraveled. Like, how does that happen? And that one I think is a little bit harder to access because it's making these historical overtures, like trying to analyze things from above. Like Absalom's really trying to comment on history and our conception of history and the past and expanding empires and the collapse of them from the outside, which is obviously a huge thing in the South too. And so for Faulkner, absolutely one of the greatest authors of all time, and you need to read him. I was doing some research and watching some other people do these videos, and people were putting Faulkner in the lower categories. Like I swear to God, and then I'm watching these people and like they literally don't go outside. I swear to God, they didn't even read Faulkner. Maybe they try to read like As I Lay Dying, like 5 pages. Like they have no idea about like the beauty of sentences and the beauty of life and like what fractured time even means. Like insane, which is fine, but it's just kind of funny to watch like Jack London go to an A and Faulkner go to a C. You're like, what? Are you high? Like, are you crazy? So next up, we have Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, and I'm going to throw this down here at a C. I like Brave New World. It's a nice book. Actually, Aldous Huxley, outside of, his connections to the elites of society and transhumanism and eugenics and Julius Huxley and everything related to all that, outside of that, he has some nice novels. Like, I would maybe even put, even though no one knows or really reads it, I would put like After Many a Summer, Dies the Swan, if I'm remembering that correctly. Shout out to Selena, who I used to ski with back in 2008 for 2009. I was like, oh, Brave New World. She was like, no, read this. Shout out to her. But in general, Brave New World, once again, obviously has a lot of themes that are good, but I would say is a general failure stylistically, dystopically, I think today, to show anything other than some just apparent truths that if you need to get them mined out, then okay. But I swear to God, you could just turn on the news. You could just say, oh, we're in the war in the Middle East again. Like, we're being watched. Like, our data's being sold everywhere. Like, people are like we're less healthy, less happy, less intelligent than ever, even though we have more money and access to information than ever. And like, what the hell is going on here? Like, I think you can generally maybe come to this stuff and like in modern movies and stuff and have really kind of pushed this control system idea much further. And like, it's somewhat been popularized, as a lot of these other books, as you're maybe starting to notice, as we start to, go through these movies and music can't show interiority. It can't show collapsed time very well. It can't show many different things, depth and the independence and humor and the freedom that novelists have just aren't necessarily done in other mediums as well. And so the novels that I think are going to outlast, that's what Shakespeare does. You know what I mean? The novels that are really going to go well, like why do we care about King Lear? Like what's happening? Why, what's happening with these characters in their hearts? Like that's what we really are drawn to. And stuff like Brave New World doesn't make me think like. So next up, I am ranking Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse 5. I'm going to throw this down here at a low B. High C. I think that Vonnegut's a great anti-war author. I think that, Breakfast of Champions and other novels by him, I would say are even better. This is obviously the classic by him, though. The novel can drag at times, and I understand that's kind of the monotony of it, the monotony of Billy Pilgrim's life. But in general, I think it's a transformative novel that if you, are trying to get into anti-war sentiments or see how trauma works or just, the experimentation of, adding sci-fi to something serious, metafictional elements with, Vonnegut at the start, the war crimes of America with the bombing of Dresden, one of the more atrocious things we've done. There's a lot, Abu Ghraib, My Lai, treatment of the Native Americans, the allowing of Bachi-Bazi in Afghanistan. There's a lot that we can do, all the countless wars that have killed a million people. Like, there's a lot that we could do. But, Kurt Vonnegut was on point with the American Empire and like looking at our actual role in the world a long, long time ago. And so absolutely spectacular, especially in the war that you're not allowed to really talk about that with, which is World War II. Like, oh yeah, well, they're just a bunch of fucking Germans. Like, who cares? But it was like, wait, this was a non-military city that we were firebombing. I mean, that's not a good look. Like, what were we doing? Like, we were just cooking people alive. Like, when the war was over, like we were already there. Like, it wasn't like Japan. We weren't softening people up and like, for the eventual attack or something like that. We were already on it was already ready to go. Like, the war was over by that point. We didn't even have to enter the European theater. Russia would have won. Like, we could have just sat back. Like, anyway, don't get me going. Next up, of course, we got Moby Dick, everyone. You guys already know this is going to the top of the list. One of the greatest novels of all time, Moby Dick. This novel has everything: spiritual transformation, intellectual transformation, and emotional transformation. This novel, I mean, there's not one thing that you can't check off of Moby Dick, you guys. It is a novel of adventure. It's with a diverse cast of just a bunch of fucking poor dudes that have been roped into this situation. It is a novel of Gnosticism, enlightenment, revenge, nature, madness. It's a novel of detail and of length, written by one of the greatest stylists of all time, a misunderstood author, trying to put everything he had because of his boyfriend Hawthorne into this novel, trying to go all the way, and he did go all the way, with something that he had experience with in whaling, something that's not available to us now in terms of like the strategies and everything. This beautiful, just perfect moment in time is what created Moby Dick, and that's why I don't even know if anything's going to beat it today. It is a novel that has transformed my life. It has shown me and taught me about the Weaver God. It's taught me about the internal madness within my own heart. Countless things I could say about Moby Dick and have countless times on this channel. And so if you have not read Moby Dick or you don't understand the power of Moby Dick, I do not know what you are doing. Like I said, I swear, anytime, it's so funny because like I'm in this world and I see people trash certain novels and I'm just like, like, dude, anyone could predict that you could, like, people are like, oh my God, you're a guy with a family. You go outside a lot. You try to not be on technology. You try to show respect and have honor and have depth in your life. You're trying to educate the world. Of course he likes Moby Dick. And then you look at the other, like, oh my God, you're a nihilist that people don't like. Like, you're unhealthy. You don't go outside. You resent nature. You live in the middle of a city and don't want to leave. Like, and you don't even try to leave and go on like a nice little camping trip occasionally. Like, you do nothing. You have no relations other than with other toxic people. Like, of course you hate Moby Dick. Like, of course you don't like Lord of the Rings. Of course you like The Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. Like, oh my God. So next up we have A Little Women, which I'm going to throw here in the C category. Shout out to not Virginia Woolf, sorry. This novel does beat Virginia Woolf. So Louisa Alcott's Little Women, funny enough, this novel didn't make, it actually made, it's funny, it's made me cry twice in my life. When I first read it when I was like 18 or 19, I think. And then secondly, when I didn't read it, but in Elena Ferrante's The Neapolitan novels, which got turned into a series on HBO titled My Brilliant Friend, when two of the girls are young outside of Napoli, they are reading, this book and just tearing it apart, and they love it, and I think that was very impactful for me. Just seeing that early love of literature and like what it can do and what the darkness it can also create. And so, very beautiful story. I think stylistically it does fall a little bit short when I'm looking at Don Quixote and Faulkner, Camus. I think that it's just a great story. It's a moving story, and we could put Little Women. We could put it up here at a B. I'm not afraid of that. That's chill with me. Like if it makes me cry and it impacts me and I think about it occasionally, okay. I'm not thinking about Brave New World or To the Lighthouse very often. I don't think many people are. Next up we have Jane Austen. I could do some more Jane Austen, but I'll throw Jane Austen up here at an A, even though that Pride and Prejudice is not my favorite novel. I just made some revisions. I threw Sense and Sensibility and Mansfield Park up here at an A, and then I threw Pride and Prejudice down here at a B. So Austen doesn't maybe write some of my favorite scenes or my favorite, one could say, topics, but I think that looking at love in the 19th century, I think at relations between men and women, and especially some of the deeper elements of that aren't like romance exactly, are great. I have a video on the channel that I don't think anyone really watched. It's called How to Read Mansfield Park, if you want to see a deep dive in me talking about Austen at length. But I talk about how in Mansfield Park, she shows what I dubbed, I think I got from Douglas Glover, titled The Erotics of Restraint, where she shows through some of her characters this insane amount of restraint that is some of the most beautiful writing ever. That's a stylistic masterpiece that is almost unrivaled in like emotional interiority and like internal characterization that we don't see on the outside. Like, she is an absolute master of that stuff in some of her novels. Some of her more famous novels like Pride and Prejudice, I feel like that happens a little bit less because there's more external drama going on. But I think that Austen is at her best and one of the greatest classic authors of all time of showing this evolution of the internal world, and that's why she is rated very highly on my list. Next up, we have Beloved by Toni Morrison. I'm going to throw this up here at a B. I'll throw it above William Faulkner. And it's so funny that I saw some like random influencer over on Substack, and they made some note, and they were like, I can't believe we wasted our time reading Beloved and like the crazy violence and sexual stuff in high school in Canada instead of reading Shakespeare. Why weren't we reading Shakespeare? And it's so funny because what people don't realize is that you're supposed to read Shakespeare alone. It's fun being traumatized in a group. I hate to say it. Like, as a teacher, people are like, oh my God, we have to, no, like reading something insane together and going through something insane together is actually like a really potent academic thing. Like an intellectual thing. Like, I guess it's akin to hazing at some level, but reading an extreme book that isn't like too extreme or too weird. Like, I understand some people's, like, why are we reading these books? Like, it's mostly the religion. Like, it's crazy that when I was a teacher for 8 years, I was challenged in terms of the books we were reading, or like didn't get approval 100 times, and it was always by like the very religious people. Never once. And when I got challenged or got called into and I had problems with, like, I got in big trouble for reading Slaughterhouse-Five with my class because of the Mormons, and like all different denominations like would push back, but never once, and I'm a non-voter, like never once was it not some hardcore religious person who thought I was corrupting their high school kid's soul through literature, and that I was, out here being some like liberal propaganda artist, like, and next week they're going to be having a communist rally at their house, like, like insanity. Like, I had one father get right in my face, and he said, in front of the principal, he said that he didn't want his son to watch the Dead Poets Society because I'm not going to have a fucking gay son. I was like, dude, if we're at the point where the Dead Poets Society, the Dead Poets Society turns your son gay, like your son was fucking gay. Like what is happening here? Like this, like I didn't even know. I'd seen that movie like 25 times. I didn't even know that there was like any of that going on in there, or like even being alluded to that, like, whoever. Like, I didn't even know, and it doesn't even matter. But like these parents would just look stuff up online and look for a problem, not even watch the movie. And I told them, like, did you go watch the movie? It's Robin Williams. They're reading poetry. They're going after chicks. I don't even think any guys hug. They just like look at each other like sentimentally, like whatever. Like, anyway. And so, I saw this post about Beloved, and I was like, yeah, slavery was violent. Oh my God. People got raped who were slaves. People who were slaves, it suffered extreme shit. Like, are you crazy? Like, oh, these fantasies, like, what is wrong with you people? I was about to show you guys, but I think I just straight up blocked that person. Like, I saw that and I was like, dude, this person is so dumb. Like, I can't handle it. Never again will I see you speak to me in my, on a screen. Like, anyway. Beloved by Toni Morrison, absolute masterpiece. The novel is about a former slave that's escaped and is basically dealing with PTSD and trauma, and their house is being haunted. And Toni Morrison is a beautiful literary writer, and she brings these themes of the South and resentment and trauma. Plot twists so much, you guys. If you haven't read this novel yet, you absolutely need to. Like, you are going to be mind blown. I could probably throw this up here at an A. I do think Morrison struggles at times to maybe creep up into the higher levels. And this is the only book we're going to be rating, like, and so this one was just on the list. Some of these books were like written like pretty late too, so I'm just gonna throw it in here at a B. But I do love Toni Morrison. So next up we have Charles Dickens, and I'm gonna throw him in here at a B. In our, the B for the bell curve is going to have the most amount of novels. I enjoy Charles Dickens. I enjoy realism. I enjoy social realism and critical realism and all this stuff. And I have a deep appreciation for him, and I need to probably reread a lot of his works. A lot of the authors I really like Dickens also. Maybe I've missed out on some of it. I just think that he's a solid novelist that, does a good job. I know why people liked him. I know why these critiques of, the shitty urban environments and many of these things were strong. But I just think that, British culture at that time was so dominant in terms of the arts and media and in attention that he became a really big deal, a really big celebrity. And, that kind of pushed on for a while. And I think that kind of inflates him, but I don't think that he's a bad author. I just think that that's where he deserves to be. Next, we have the Iliad, and we'll throw the Odyssey. We have the Iliad and the Odyssey, and I'm going to throw these up here. We'll throw the Iliad in the B category, and we'll throw the Odyssey also in the B category, which I'm sure somewhat seems like heresy. And it's partially because I don't know which one I want to put into the A exactly. I actually have a little bit more sentiment toward the Iliad, but I understand that the Odyssey is much, I would say, better. The reason I like the Iliad is I think it's the greatest, maybe one of the greatest examples ever written of how cultures devolve in terms of their ethics. The story starts because Paris, takes away Helen and breaks this bond of consummation and friendship and all this stuff. And then by the end, and then slowly but surely there are like violations of law and ethics. And by the end, people are getting sacrificed, human sacrifice, bodies are being drugged, or Hector's body's being, dragged around. Like there's a total loss of honor throughout the entire piece. And that's what I think Homer was really trying to talk about, like civilizationally, and like why that's really bad. And that's what's happening in our society right now. We are literally losing all honor, because of how polarized we've become. And so I think that that's a really strong message, even though I understand the symbolic influence of the Odyssey and some of the messages there. Penelope, the original weaver god, the original weaver, right? The original Melvillian Gnostic influencer. Shout out to her. I understand all of that, but I taught mythology for 2 years straight when I was a high school teacher, and like reread these texts like multiple times and taught them, and like we didn't go easy. We read the entire thing in full. I know abridged versions like 99% of authors do. And as I read it, I got it, and it just influential, but not everything. So next up we have Fyodor Dostoevsky, and we are going to rank 4 novels by him. And so I am going to throw Notes from the Underground down here at a C. I'm going to throw Devils at an A, Crime and Punishment also at an A, probably around right here, and the Brothers Karamazov coming in at for sure S tier. I would say a little bit behind Moby Dick. And if you look at the screen right now, these are actually, like, I would say the correct ordering of my opinion of these books in general. There might be some slight variations, but in terms of like their greatness, in my opinion, from greatest to the worst. And so let's start with the lowest rated, the Notes from the Underground. I think it's an interesting novel. I think The Underground Man's a great archetype for Dostoevsky's later work, but I feel like the prostitution angle, once kind of the ranting of the underground man kind of ends, I think that it kind of falls short, especially when I'm looking like, is the underground man contending with, David Copperfield or As I Lay Dying? But outside of that, I think that Dostoevsky's novel Devils is an absolute masterpiece. I could throw it up, it just really depends on how I'm feeling. It's personally my favorite novel, but I think a lot of the lessons are very hidden. It's a very dark novel. There's, suicide, exploitation, rampant nihilism, and the message is, I think, pretty deep, and it's somewhat hard to mine about us being possessed and, by society and by this new world, and like what happens to us, and like the different gods we worship when we remove ourselves, not from religion, but even other institutions too fast. And so I think that Devils in general, you can mine a lot out of it, but I think it's so weird. You have to do some finicky stuff to really make it happen. I think that Crime and Punishment and Raskolnikov's kind of arc has a little bit more redemptive qualities in it, and something that more people can relate to. I know know that I did when I first read it, and I know that it just in general people relate to Raskolnikov a little bit more. And so I think that Crime and Punishment is a bigger masterpiece because of that. I think stylistically and ambitiously, it's a little bit less than The Devils or the Demons by Dostoevsky, but I think that Dostoevsky's, I would say, heart and nature, which he explores more in The Brothers Karamazov, comes out more in Crime and Punishment, which I think is his better side. And The Brothers Karamazov, as you've heard me maybe talk about before, is one of the greatest novels of all time. It is a novel of redemption. It's a novel of discovering the 4 different demons within us. The demon of being too passive, the demon of being a logic bro and viewing everything objectively, and the demon of being a hedonist. And then just also being just like a neglected, like pitiful person, like the bastard brother is. And so those 4 archetypes are really, as men and I would say as women now that we've all been kind of shoehorned into this world, are the greatest things, the great demons, the great things that you need to explore. Not being a spiritual, passive, new age individual, learning how to view reality through multiple subjective lens outside of just pure logic, which 99% of people do, not being a hedonist, and, rising out of pity. If you can accomplish those 4 things and not fall into that, I would say that you're having a great life. I'm over here saying that that's really hard, that I haven't mastered that. That's like really now with what we're up against as a modern society, like a lifelong journey, it's like, it's a lot, you guys. It's really hard to do. And so, yeah, shout out to Dostoevsky. Next, we have Mrs. Dalloway, which I don't like as much as To the Lighthouse, so I'm going to throw that down here at a D. After that, we have To Kill a Mockingbird, which I'm going to throw here at a low C. Great message, not that well written. I think that in terms of YA novels or like, kind of novels like that, I get it. Atticus Finch, Boo Radley, like all this stuff. It's nice. It's awesome. Sadly, it's a novel that a lot of modern kids don't really like anymore, that are like really tapped into the world, like Animal Farm, To Kill a Mockingbird, are somewhat lost on the kids these days. Even 1984, Edgar Allan Poe, like I've had to adapt myself to different types of novels now, other than those. But in general, I've had to read To Kill a Mockingbird a couple times now as an adult, and like I said, it's nice but not that good. Next up, we have Mark Twain, which I'm going to throw up here up at an A. I'll throw Mark Twain above Faulkner. Mark Twain, one of the greatest humorists and stylists in American history. The American fiction goat. He's definitely on the Mount Rushmore of American fiction, up there with, you guys already know my Mount Rushmore: Sarah J. Maas, Sarah J. Maas, Rupi Kaur, Mark Twain, and Gabby Hanna. Let's go, everyone. But what's funny to me about Twain is that, is he better than, Charles Dickens? Maybe not, but he's an American and I'm an American, and I feel like, George W. Bush right now, right? Like, they attacked my daddy, now I gotta go take over Iraq. They beat my daddy. George Bush already screwed me up and has made me look like an idiot because I grew up listening to him say nuclear. It's a nuclear bomb. And like, people, I'll get a comment like, you're a fucking idiot, Ian. And it's like, I know it's nuclear, but like, just feels good to say, we hung him, nuclear. Where I'm living right now, like they screwed up, like everyone calls like the all the Native American stuff that's like a part of the town and like the town name and all this stuff, they just purposefully mispronounce it. It's like so annoying. I used to rage out when I was a teacher. I couldn't even do it. I used to live in a town called Sahuarita. It's Sahuarita. It's obviously a Spanish name. And literally the principal of my school and everyone, all these like just like random like country folk would say, Sarita, it's Sarita. I was like, do you want me to literally miss a syllable? You guys are missing, there's an HUA. Do you guys want me to just miss syllables in your name? Do we call our state Arizona or Arizona? Like these lazy ass people like stylizing things, it's literally one of the biggest red flags to me when people are being lazy with their speech and not saying a word correctly, and they could figure out how to say it correctly because people do say it correctly. And it's usually, I would say, disrespectful. In almost every case, it's a non-English word that takes maybe a little bit extra to figure out how to say and do every single time until it just becomes normalized. Very ignorant American shit going on, but I'm sure that's everywhere. I want to thank one of my professors. I read Huck Finn and Adventures of Tom Sawyer when I was in high school, and I was just kind of like, yeah, that was all right. But he told me one time on Christmas break, you need to read this, like, because I was saying stuff like that, and he was like, no, no, you need to sit down and read. And what Twain did, I think more than Dickens, is be alive on the page, bring some visceral nature. When you look at Faulkner, when you look at Vonnegut, when you look at these authors, even in the humorous tradition, whether it's Tom Robbins or whoever in your culture, what Mark Twain did for the world and what he did for literature was bring energy and aliveness to the page. That's what I'm trying to do on BookTube right now. I'm trying to bring, instead of, hi guys, like instead of just like deadness, like we need to bring energy. And so that happens though through regionality, that happens through dialect, that happens through violence and absurdity. He's talking about real stuff too. You know, when you look at Huckleberry Finn, yeah, it's an adventure story. It's super funny, but it's really a critique of slavery. You know, there's this beautiful subplot resonance going on where he's actually tearing down some of these insane institutions. He's talking about this Southern group morality and our good conscience and like all of the stuff that, you know, he saw and like understood was a bunch of crap. And so he learned not to preach though. It's hard, right? Like it's really hard to see injustice in our world. And I don't think that we have anything akin to like, you know, obviously like slavery or something like, you know, like there's slavery still in the world, but like, you know, like wide scale, like approved slavery. It's, you know, it's a lot. And like you want to preach, right? You want to just get up on the pulpit and start screaming at people or go kill people like John Brown did, you know, go crazy. But you know, the arts allow you, and what you should be doing is speaking subtly. That's where transformation happens. You open someone's heart with the humor, and then you make them think a little bit. You make them push back. You know what's happened to me? It makes me want to cry, you guys. Not like, oh, like I'm a racist. It's like, no, it's like I've had opinions that I've held on to, whether because of trauma or just matter of fact and because of pride. And I've been opened up by literature, and I sit there and I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to do this anymore. Like, I'm not going to be this person. And, you know, it's interesting, this channel, you know, someone left a comment and they're like, I like the old right conscious videos. I like this. I like that. And so then the other day I watched a couple and I was like, you know, yeah, I was different. Things change. But some of the opinions I held, I actually feel like I strongly disagree with. And I think that are, you know, not, you know, maybe I'm a little older, a little more bitter or whatever now. But like, you know, back then I had some, you know, strong opinions that I think were really holding me back from really reaching people. And actually, you know, I was dehumanizing people at times and like, you know, not really connected to this mission I am on now. And that's literature and other arts opened me up to that and really like, you know, touch my soul. So Twain did that for me also, like really good stuff, really expanding. You know, you guys know me. I love the South. I love Southern Gothic. I love learning about it all. Like I should live in the South, but I'm like, fuck a tornado. Like I like mountains. I like to ski. I like to camp, you know, out away from people, not in, you know, out here, there's open spaces a lot more. And I know out there is too, but anyway, like it definitely upped my level. And so Twain has to be an A. Plus just the people he's influenced just alone, like so many modern songwriters and stuff, you know, amazing. So next up we have the man, the myth, the legend himself, the man. I'm getting a bunch of new shirts. I've designed like 10 new, I didn't design them actually, my girl, Melissa Smith, shout out to you, Melissa, you're the best. She designed a bunch of new merch for us, literary renaissance merch. We have like 2 or 3 Tolstoy shirts coming out. I'm just testing them out with fabrics, you know, the whole thing. But anyway, I should have that on right now, but I won't until they're actually available for you guys. But Leo Tolstoy, one of the fathers of the literary renaissance. Where do we even begin? So this is where things get hard. I am going to throw War and Peace up here above the Brothers Karamazov. I'm going to throw Anna Karenina up here behind The Sound and the Fury. I'm going to throw The Death of Ivan Ilyich up in the B's, and then I'm going, oh, sorry, that was Resurrection. I'll throw Resurrection at a high C, and I'll put The Death of Ivan Ilyich down here at a C, and Resurrection up here at a B. So let's begin. The Death of Ivan Ilyich by Tolstoy is an awesome novel, but it's a short novel. I think that it gets its point across of death very well, but where do we go from there? What does that mean? What's the point? And I think that requires further study and just the contemplation of death alone, even though it can be a shock, I think in the modern world has become somewhat obtruse, you know, it's obtuse or, you know, abstract, especially if you aren't a Christian, right? If you're not like kind of in this funnel that I think Tolstoy's maybe trying to push or some of these ideas, even though Tolstoy didn't believe that like Jesus Christ came back from the dead or people were going to heaven. But nonetheless, you know, if you are taking a more loose approach to spirituality and, you know, life after death and stuff like this, I think that just a confrontation with death alone is not enough. You know, that may be enough to, if you're a Christian, to get you back on track or do stuff like that. And that's why I know it's very popular in in those groups, and like I see it like ranked highly all the time with like a lot of like, I used to do videos like, back in the day on BookTube. You could find, I've taken some of these down, but I used to do like celebrities' favorite books, like just like rating them and like trashing them. And I would see in like political influencers and politicians, and I saw that like a lot of like right-wing influencers that were Christians loved The Death of Ivan Ilyich. And I was, I always wondered about that. And so really great book, it did impact me. Like I felt impacted. I reread it a year or so ago for the book club. And like, I felt I snuggled in a little bit closer with my kids, but I feel like Resurrection by Tolstoy is much better because it just has more space. Resurrection, which I gave a B, is about 600 pages. And I feel like really does balance this idea of transformation with actual story elements. The Death of Ivan Ilyich is really just pure transformation, just trying to make you think and feel. But I think that Tolstoy does that better at length. I think that when he has time to explain himself, that it can go a lot better. And that's where his true talents are. When Tolstoy preaches, whether that's in his nonfiction about Christianity or anarchism or art, I feel like he falls short for me at times. And I feel like when he is able to expand and be narrative and almost rant, that's where he's best. And so I give Resurrection a B. And when we look at, the top of the list, we have Anna Karenina up here. And Anna Karenina, absolute masterpiece, a masterclass in writing and dynamics within the family and within society. I love the subplots, as I've talked about before, with Levin and all that, and Levin and the spiritual journey and tragedy of Anna and everything going on with that. I think that in terms of like making you contemplate death and the purpose of life, Anna Karenina does a much better job than like The Death of Ivan Ilyich. And then finally, one of the greatest novels of all time, War and Peace, everyone. I've been talking about Russians a lot, so I'm kind of moving through. I did a whole video ranking every Russian classic, so I'm not trying to like repeat too much. I've been talking about these, Tolstoy a lot lately on the channel. And so for those who are new though, War and Peace is one of the greatest novels of all time because it basically gives equal weight to the philosophical side of things, and war and these grand narratives, and to chaos and these big things with Napoleon and Russian culture that are going on. But also it gives just as much weight to home life and the domestic life and the horror and the abundance and the ecstasy of both. War and Peace sprawls, it rants at times, but if you're willing and able to read it, it can profoundly change your soul. It can turn you into a fanatic. Honestly, it can turn you into someone who craves higher ideals and transformation and so much more. And that's why I am such a big fan of it. That's why I think everybody needs to read Tolstoy. You could literally start with, I would recommend starting with The Death of Ivan Ilyich or Anna Karenina. Almost all of Tolstoy is very readable. I would say that War and Peace can be a little bit more challenging because of some of the digressions, but I think that those digressions make it one of the greatest philosophical pieces of fiction ever written. That's why it's up there with Moby Dick, War and Peace, Brothers Karamazov. They are literally pushing spiritual and philosophical ideas on you while keeping you interested in a story, which I think is the highest level, right? Like, some of these novels are like cool and they teach you something, but playing at the highest level in both categories, philosophy, spirituality, and story, that's what a true classic and a true great novel is about. So next up we have the works of Ernest Hemingway, and we're only going to rank 2, and I'm going to put The Sun Also Rises up here maybe at a low A, and The Old Man and the Sea up here at a high C. So I personally love The Old Man and the Sea, but once again, it's a little short. It is a great novel to get people into classic literature. I've given that book literally to hundreds of students, kind of the boys that hate reading or think it's dumb, and it's just simple, and it's a nice story about fishing and, this guy going all the way, and they can get into it. And there is some deep symbolism in The Old Man and the Sea. We did a book club on this novel, and a lot of people rolled up, I think over 30 people did, and we had so many different interpretations of the text, which is usually a good thing, and I think what, Hemingway's iceberg theory is about. But Hemingway's greater work, in my opinion, is, The Sun Also Rises, A Farewell to Arms, For Whom the Bell Tolls, or kind of his Nick Adams short story collection. And no matter which one you kind of want to add in, and I could rank more than one right now to kind of bolster the number, but we're going over 100, everyone. We're not even close to halfway done with this video yet. Maybe on time, but not in terms of ranking. But Hemingway is the master of being able to show trauma and being able to hide stuff within his minimalistic prose. There are so many authors now that are doing minimalism that have these terse sentences, but in general, they aren't really saying anything underneath because I don't feel like they've actually lived a life. It's a very interesting thing to think about that someone like Hemingway, who was in a world war, who suffered a lot of trauma at the start of his life, who had a very weird hyper-masculine fixation, and then in his personal life was a big game hunter, was a spy for Russia, was a spy for America, was going after Cuban U-boats. Like all this stuff that was going on with Hemingway kind of made him into a wild figure, and he was a pretty complex figure. And so when you add that with minimalism, it's this beautiful combination because you're containing actual energy. There's just been this push, Bret Easton Ellis, American Psycho, and others since like the late 80s of this type of minimalism that's really been pushed in some MFA programs and by writers of that sort that, they were raised in suburbia. Maybe they had a traumatic life or suffered trauma, but they really never went out into the world, and they don't, from what I can tell, have a strong energetic soul or presence. And so when they try to do minimalism, there's a lot less hiding underneath it. And even though, I would say that they do a good job of pushing one voice, one minimalistic, a consistent voice, which is kind of the hardest part of doing minimalism. Nonetheless, I think there's something energetically missing there, which Hemingway brings to the table, in most of his work. And so I'm going to put Hemingway up at an A. All of his major novels, I feel like, are in that category, especially if you don't come into Hemingway with these preconceived notions. Hemingway's weird because I think if you just enter his work, like a lot of people enter his work, it's like, dude, this is just like very flat. And I don't think they maybe understand that there's like a whole psychological complex behind it all. And so, how do we rank books? Do we rank books on what you know, or like in a new critical point of view where you just come in and just start reading, right? And you judge what's on the page. And unfortunately, I think that we have to judge partially on what we know about the person, right? That we're not just these independent people. And so I think that some people, though, hear about Hemingway being one of the best, and they don't know much about him, and then they show up and they're like, wait, we got Virginia Woolf, we got Tolstoy, we got Proust, we got all these people during this time period, and like Hemingway is reading very flat, and he's just talking about like women and drinking and like being impotent. But I don't think that they maybe understand why he is doing that, the point of the prose, because it's very disconnected from the more ambitious or classic style. It was very innovative by him. It was something that Ezra Pound, the poet, helped him do. And so, yeah, it's kind of an odd situation that you need to know a little bit about Hemingway and his trauma, I think, to get a lot out of it. And you also, I don't think, should be programmed into this idea that he was just like a misogynist and an asshole. Like a lot of people just believe because he shot guns and was like, he's the macho man of literature, that he's inherently bad. That's been a big thing in literature. Not any of you guys, but out there in the academy, I experienced a lot of that. And so next up on our list, so goodbye, Hemingway. Thank you for everything that you did. We have Call of the Wild by Jack London and Jack London's works in general. I'm going to throw this down here in the C category. I think that Jack London is a nice author, but I don't think that stylistically he really pushed the limit at all. I don't think he really brought that energy to his works. I mean, yeah, definitely not consistent enough. Definitely not as good as many. I mean, we're talking about Jack London versus Tolstoy, like in terms of like when they were writing and like releasing their works. Like, really? Like, yeah, he's definitely down here in the C category. So next up, we have the man, the myth, the legend himself, James Joyce, one of the greatest of all time. And I'm going to be ranking 3 of his novels right now. So first up, we have A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, which I'm going to throw in here probably in the B category. We have Finnegan's Wake, which I'm going to place at the high B category. And then we have Ulysses, which I'm going to throw up here in the S category. And so where do we get started with Joyce? I mean, first of all, I have to admit that I've read Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man twice now, or maybe even 3 times, and Ulysses and Finnegan's Wake only 1 time, even though I did do that in a class. And so I may be ignorant in terms of, putting Finnegan's Wake down at a B, but I think that Finnegan's Wake, in terms of actually understanding it is one of those books that from what I ascertained, that I would have to read it multiple times for it to get up here to the S. But I feel like Ulysses had a little bit more power the first time I read it, and there was more to look at. I did have a companion guide and like other things to go along with, and I've listened to a lot of lectures on it. So that's probably why it's kind of pushed up a little bit further for me. But I think it is his more transformative work. So first of all, Joyce was the master of this modernist idea of objective disconnection, of just pure objectivity on the page, of being able to control everything and combine the past, the future, and the present all into one story. When you look at Ulysses, basically, the prose in Joyce it's literally movable. There are hard objective blocks of being. Earlier I was talking about Woolf and her prose being somewhat transparent. So instead of looking at language, in most novels we look at the language, we look at what we are reading to see who the characters are, right? To see what's going on. But in Joyce, you look at the prose, you look at what he's writing to see how the world is constructed. And what's insane is that Aaron Gwynn over on Substack, and I think on X the other day, talked about like how Joyce spent some inordinate amount of time writing one sentence. Here it is. While he was writing Ulysses, Joyce told his friend Frank Budgeon that he'd spent 8 hours working on a single sentence. The sentence: "The heaven tree of stars hung with humid night blue fruit." Absolute fire, everyone. That's really good. And if we want to speak on Ulysses, Joyce wrote it to describe what basically a day in Dublin looked like. He wanted to do it so well that if he felt like a nuclear bomb, which didn't exist, he felt like if the city was destroyed, you could rebuild what it looked like from just his book alone. And that if you could do that, I mean, imagine if you could recapture one day of your childhood, like everything, the interiority, everything perfectly. How much of your life would it describe? Would that be more valuable than like 100 hours of family video? And the answer is probably yes, especially if you were trying to show it to someone else who didn't have that same set of memories. And what's so innovative about Ulysses is that there is no narrator. There is an evolving style of prose. When, for instance, you're in like a maternity ward, there is this like birthing energy of expansion in the prose. And then suddenly, if you go to the pub, it's this drunkard, loose, this almost incomprehensible language. And every single different polyphonic voice is done perfectly. And so I feel like Finnegan's Wake misses that a little bit. And I think A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man is also a really beautiful novel, but it wasn't exactly maximalist yet. I mean, the prose in there is wonderful. I mean, with Stephen's like awakening and like everything that happens, like it's like boom, like it's absolutely gorgeous. But I also think there's a lack of purpose in it, or a lack of transformative qualities other than like the sight stuff and like it just being so explosive on the page, which I think Ulysses kind of taps into. So to bring a real classic in, we need Beowulf. I mean, right? I'm going to throw Beowulf up here at an A. I think that as English speakers, tapping into our original stories, whether that's Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, whether Arthurian romances, Beowulf, Chaucer, as we're about to talk about in a second, I think that's all very, very underrated. And that, especially with Beowulf, it has a deep connection to nature. It has a deep connection to living energy. By the time we reach Shakespeare, and then most of these even authors I would even throw in this list, we've basically been disconnected from nature. We've been disconnected from the soul. We've kind of moved fully into the intellect. And Beowulf still has this deep connection to nature, to the soul, to story, to the old world, all these different things that were lost. And that's why it's very transformative for me. That's why I think everyone should read it. That's why I think it's influenced so many different things, whether that's The Lord of the Rings and people like Tolkien, just countless people. I mean, it is the story. It is the greatest story in the English language. Like, it is what birthed so many great ideas, and it's one of the greatest things to look back to. And so I'm a little bit biased on that. I have to read Don Quixote, which was, written centuries and centuries after, in translation. But nonetheless, moving forward, I am going to throw The Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison at a C. Obviously, the message of this is really good. I've talked about this novel before, but I also think that in general, the execution of it compared to other novels that I'm putting in front of it is definitely lacking. I first read this like, back when I was like maybe 20 or 21, because that's what you're supposed to do. It's a classic. And I was like, it like sucked. I was like bored reading through it. And then I had to reread it in university in a class and like actually study it. And once again, I came across, and like everyone who I was talking to, I was like, this isn't very good. And it was like, funny enough, we were just seemingly reading really bad books in that class, because then in some of our other classes, we were reading like at the same time, like Ceremony by Leslie Marmon Silko and some of these other novels, which I understand were a couple decades later and different topics. I was like, these are way better. Like just objectively, this is like a much better read. And when I look at the themes of The Invisible Man, being othered, being oppressed, and trying to search for your identity through that, it doesn't resonate, I don't think, as big as some of these other novels that are dealing with, I think, similar issues, or issues that I would categorize, when it comes to love and death and the purpose of life and finding God, and some of these other things maybe as important, because this idea of being othered and trying to find clarity on who you are is something that everyone has to go through. And oppressed groups, of course, have to do that more. But I feel like in 2026, with all the information that we have, with literally the amount of diversity that we have in almost every single place, unless you're living like somewhere really odd, I don't really feel like that's as big of an issue. Like when I'm looking at people becoming less connected to nature, less connected to God, I'm saying this as a non-Christian, less connected to anything, becoming doomers, becoming shut off, becoming numb, becoming unhealthy, dying early, not pursuing relationships, becoming red-pilled, becoming misandrous, like becoming all these different things. Like there are bigger problems on the table that I feel like need to be addressed through literature that like are really, really important, and that will solve that. If you can solve those, you can solve a lot of the other stuff. And so The Invisible Man, yeah, cool novel. I think very influential, but in terms of like just reading it, I felt like it was very hard, and I know other people feel the same way. We'll throw Charles Dickens again up here at a B. Next, we have The Great Gatsby and also Tender is the Night. I'm going to throw F. Scott Fitzgerald, The Great Gatsby, down here at a C for The Great Gatsby and Tender is the Night. So I like the style of F. Scott Fitzgerald. At times his sentences are really beautiful. He is a really clean writer, but I just don't feel like The Great Gatsby and Tender is the Night really break out into this B category. Like, is The Great Gatsby as good as William Faulkner? Finnegan's Wake? Like, I know I've rated it like this. No, I could say it's comparable to Virginia Woolf or, An Invisible Man, or, it's in that category. As you're kind of seeing, these categories of the C and D categories are really the books that we are supposed to read. The book class, the high school classics, these kind of early gatekeeping classics that have been pushed on to us because they are kind of universal. They have messages that don't necessarily rock the boat, and I don't feel like really get into high levels of transformation. Because if you are sitting down and you read Moby Dick with your class, if you read War and Peace with your class, I mean, if you read the Brothers Karamazov with a class, and you're not even allowed to lecture, you're not really allowed to talk about it, but if you were able to openly speak about some of those texts, if you were able to speak about the Lord of the Rings openly and talk about like addiction and other things that like students are going through, which you literally can't, like you'll literally get fired. Like everyone has to play dumb in a classroom, right? You're like, no one out here smokes weed, no one out here has sex, no one out like we're all non-religious, we don't mention Jesus, we don't mention spirituality. Like there's all these blocks up that you don't really have to confront in an F. Scott Fitzgerald novel, that you don't really have to confront in like Brave New World. Like totalitarianism is bad. Yeah. Racism is bad. Yeah. Like that's the type of stuff. But if you really want to go all the way with some of these bigger novels, like the conversations suddenly turn personal. They turn and reflect back on the parents really fast, which is, parents don't want that. Parents want their kids to be babysat at public schools. Not all of them, but I would say most parents just want a babysitter, just want them to just be somewhat formulated to get a job, and they don't want anybody rocking the boat and making their life harder. They don't want anyone to question their choices because they've never even questioned question their own choices. They've never even thought about their own philosophy, and it's very weak and could be very easily dismantled by one book. And that, that's why I literally think that's why, these typical novels are read, because you can get a little bit more juice out of them. You can talk about some of these bigger themes. I've seen students be able to get into The Great Gatsby and not be able to get into some of these harder novels because you literally would have to deconstruct a worldview. And so I don't, even though F. Scott Fitzgerald is a clean writer, I just don't think that he really brings any transformative energy past surface level human issues, which are great to talk about, but we're looking for more, everybody. And speaking of more, let's talk about the GOAT, William Shakespeare, everyone. So I have 3 Shakespeare plays in here. We have Hamlet, King Lear, and Macbeth. And so I'm going to rank them from King Lear, Macbeth, and Hamlet. Well, what can I say about William Shakespeare other than he is one of the most transformative authors of all time? Almost all of his plays, including some of like the boring histories or what I would consider the lesser comedies, would probably make it onto the B tier, if not the high C tier, in this ranking that I am doing. He was not only a master of style, which has obviously been talked about ad infinitum in universities and with lovers of the classics defending him online and tearing down other more modern authors, but he also throughout his work covers almost all the important topics, I would say. Obviously some of them are missing, but when you look at someone's body of work, let's say an author's maybe 15 novels or so they can get out by the end of their life, a lot of the time they are in, as I've said before, kind of one field of themes and they perfect that. But throughout Shakespeare's work, for instance, if you just look at like the realm of trauma, we have schizophrenia, we have postpartum depression with Lady Macbeth, we have mania, we have suicidal ideation. There's like all these different things just in the world of trauma that Shakespeare covers in such a way that it would translate, and it does translate still to modern reality, which is one of his greatest strengths, that he can talk about countless things, whether it's fairies in A Midnight Summer's Dream, the breaking of an empire in King Lear, which has been done a million times again, whether that's in HBO's Succession or just straight adaptations like Kurosawa's Ran. And it's honestly a toss-up when we look at the major tragedies of which one is the greatest. But I feel like that generational run across 5 years or so when Shakespeare wrote Hamlet, Lear, then Macbeth was absolutely insane. And he was really tapped into his shadow side. That by the time we reach like The Tempest, had started to fade away, because like it's like by the time we reach the end of Macbeth, even though Macbeth is like in a very dire situation because of, spoiler alert, like 600 years later, like the death of Lady Macbeth, he writes, "Life is but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing." And many Shakespeare characters have been in dire situations, have confronted death, have confronted loss and tragedy, and have never gone that deep. And I understand that it was like, Macbeth had hit rock bottom, but he still hadn't hit rock bottom necessarily yet. But even the nihilism in Macbeth cannot touch the nihilism and some of the darkness in Lear. And I hate to say it, but we are tragedy coded. I think that whether it's Othello or Macbeth or whatever, that the more tragic and darker that Shakespeare lets himself get, the better the works are. And then historically, the more influential they are. I don't know if that's because we're trapped in this matrix that Shakespeare, because of some of his own trauma and his own darkness, just went so hard and it just worked out so well that we became so influenced by him. And just obviously the tragedy of the modern world, and even stuff like World War I and World War II, which weren't supposed to happen when we all were like enlightened beings that were somewhat literate. It was supposed to happen, depending on how you want to think about it, that we're just violent by design and it's just going to happen no matter what. But nonetheless, all these authors that we love, are inspired and basically following Shakespeare's line. And so thus in retrospect, as an adult, when I read Shakespeare, after I've read all these other tragic works, even something like Dune, which is inspired by Lear, with the preacher and stuff, and the breakup of the kingdom, then when I look back, do I value those Shakespearean plays more? And the answer is probably yes. It's basically we're in this big whirlpool where we're just like continuing to go into this world of tragedy, while there's this other avenue that authors like Ton Robin Robbins and other humorous, not even other humorous authors, but that other literary authors have tried to find, but just doesn't have the support, not just in terms of like people wanting to read it, but just psychically. Because if you can take Shakespeare to the next level, if you can take McCarthy, Dostoevsky, Toni Morrison, whatever author you want to talk about to the next level, then you are going to be successful in this kind of book industry and in the world of books. And kind of experimenting and going outside of that box is not as rewarded. And as authors who are, usually these introverted individuals, they usually, aren't these happy people a lot of the time. It's just the nature of the game that you got to lock yourself alone in a room, and something that's not talked about a lot is reject people. We now understand this with remote work, right? But authors all throughout time, they didn't have an office. They had to basically be so disciplined that they had to boot people out of their life. Like if you've ever, if you worked from home during COVID or something, or still do, and you have a family, and this is what I'm doing. Like I like a couple minutes ago, my daughter was knocking on the door, and it's like, I got to keep going. I got to keep the party going, because if I came out every time, then I would never get anything done. And so writers do this to the extreme, and a lot of the time it was during a period where it was very kind of odd that you would be doing that. You'd be shoveling yourself into a room, like very weird stuff. Anyway, I could go on about that all day, but Shakespeare, obviously one of the most influential authors of all time. If you look at his entire bibliography, they are shorter works, Macbeth coming in at like 15,000 lines, some of his longer works like Hamlet coming in at near 30,000 lines. I don't know. Sorry, not words, excuse me. I'm saying lines. 15,000 words and 30,000 lines, excuse me. It's 30,000 words, excuse me. You look at that, and it's, even though something like Hamlet takes, 4.5 hours if you do the whole piece to perform out loud, when you have authors like Tolstoy that were writing 400,000 word novels and, leave a huge bibliography, it's somewhat of a toss-up. But what I like about Shakespeare is we have dozens and dozens of different examples. As with many of our favorite authors, they, only really can get, that 10 to 20 novels done. There are pulp authors like, Philip K. Dick or Yukio Mishima, or people who like speed write and like go ham with it. But usually the quality's hit or miss, and you really, once again, only get like 10 to 15 novels that are actually good. And so having, I would say, 36 Shakespearean plays that are A or S tier is literally insane category. And I would say I like this book, but it is generally, once again, one of these overrated classics that we have to read. I feel like in terms of anti-war novels, or even novels that talk about conformity or propaganda, there are plenty of other better novels out there. So next we have John Steinbeck, and I'm going to first throw Grapes of Wrath up here in a low B. I'm gonna put both of these in the B category, just behind Charles Dickens, ahead of Kurt Vonnegut, especially for East of Eden. And so I have a video titled Ranking Every Great American Novel, where I go really deep into like all the novelists. I'm going to obviously go deep right now, but I would say that Steinbeck is obviously a really great author, but is obviously a CIA agent, a narc. But I'll keep my own biases about him working for the CIA out of this analysis. So my biggest gripe with Steinbeck as I get older, I remember reading him in high school and being like, wow, this is like A tier. This is like really good. And even holding that opinion for a while. But now that I've reread him, I obviously have appreciated a lot of the stuff that he's doing. But I also see a lot of the machinery behind it now. This is one of my gripes also with Dostoevsky. I feel the plot manufacturing going on. And for Dostoevsky, that was a 19th century novelist. That's a little bit more acceptable, even though there were many 19th century novelists, whether that was Jane Austen or Tolstoy or Mary Shelley or plenty of other authors, Theodore Dreiser, who I think felt less manufactured. And so by the time we reach Steinbeck, he is doing more than, let's say, some of these 19th century novelists. He's trying to put together a different mythos. He's trying to retell an American tragedy, and in East and Eden's case, like kind of Cain and Abel. He's trying to do a lot at once, very ambitious. This is a psychological novel. This is a family saga. This is one could say a transformative novel, actually, and that's why so many people love East of Eden, which is why I do have respect for it. It's trying to talk about morality. But the problem is that these characters that Steinbeck comes up with, for instance, in East of Eden, like Kathy, there's so much going on. There's so much depth, that it's just too big for her. It's just too big to be, novels don't need to be realistic. But when I read Kathy now, when I read, even some things in the Grapes of Wrath, it overextends. I'm like, this is too much psychic weight, whether it's demonic or just through synchronicity or through other problems, for this actually to feel like it's working, because a character shouldn't just be there to be teaching me lessons and to just be kind of like serving as a symbol. They should be, through their actions and through their radiance alone, kind of doing that. And so I feel like that's where Steinbeck struggles, that the plots, the time periods, the arguments that he's making are great, but I also think that he, this is maybe why he became a CIA agent. I'm just kind of shooting from the hip with some creative theory here, psychological armchairing. But I feel like he didn't necessarily have a perfect grip on actually human and what drives us. And he did have these big opinions and these big, moral ideas, whether that was his interest in like leftism or eventually supporting Lyndon B. Johnson, like these kind of crazy swings that he was making. And so he's an ideas man, and that's great. And I love it. And like, we honestly need more, we need more. We're in a time right now where we need more ideas than even characters that are compelling, even though you need both. But I feel like with the genre revolution, we as modern authors, have learned to, write pretty compelling plots and characters. We understand art. There's like, go look up like writing character arcs on Amazon. You'll probably get hundreds of books that have been written even before the AI evolution on like character arcs, and type in like how to write good dialogue. You'll get 100 books on how to write good dialogue. And like, there's all these different books on writing, which people say like those suck, but there's sound advice in there. And like, it can help you reach like this level of being good enough. But with Steinbeck, it was just an unfortunate case of too big of ideas and not enough execution. So next up we have Hermann Hesse, the man, the myth, the legend, the author of Steppenwolf, Siddhartha, and Damien. And so I am going to put Damien up here in the high C category, and then I'll put Siddhartha and Steppenwolf in the low B category. So I'm a huge fan of Hermann Hesse, everyone. He is a transformative author. He's one of the authors that got me into the game of reading. I think Siddhartha was the book that that first got me into like literary fiction, changed my life, helped me go into my journey with Eastern philosophy. So I will always be thankful to him. But, a lot of Hermann Hesse's work is simple. It's meant to be simple. It's meant to be for, I would say, more beginner readers, intermediate readers. And that's not a bad thing. We just read Damien in the Right Conscious Book Club and Siddhartha in 2025. We are also reading Steppenwolf later this year, probably September, I think, if I remember correctly. And what's interesting about rereading Siddhartha or rereading Damien was that many people had read it before or were reading it for the first time and felt like it was a palate cleanser that was very refreshing. That I know one of my friends, Kurt, who's in the book club, said that, it felt like it helped him tap back into what it felt like when you first got into spirituality, whatever age that was, whether it was when you were 15 or 19 or whenever. You guys remember that when you first, hopefully you do, hopefully you're, I don't know how old you are, but if you haven't had that experience yet, you need to go do whatever you can to find it. But when you first get into religion or spirituality, that initial rawness is overwhelming. It's immense. It's the type of rawness that can get people sober who are hardcore addicts for 6 or 9 months until it wears off. Like it's strong, it's a real healing force, but eventually it starts to fade, right? Eventually you become bored of it, or it becomes somewhat commonplace in your soul. And we tried to revive it. We tried to renew it. And that's always the goal, but we also intellectualize it, right? We start getting into apologetics. Like, your cousin, the atheist, says, he'll make something like Tacitus in 115 AD said, talked about Jesus, but it took him 115 years to talk about this dude that was supposedly so big. And then you're suddenly mad, and then you're researching, and then it's a rabbit hole. With spirituality, like, you're not going to heaven. You're talking to demons. And you're like, I'm not talking to demons. It's an entire thing. And so and eventually that has to happen, because if it doesn't, you're just stagnated. I know people that are Christians, but they're just like, go to church and they're just stagnating. they're not even thinking about it. And so you have to figure out how to keep that energy up. And so sometimes reading something more simple or doing something more simple, sometimes just literally like going camping or like, going and, praying or like, like doing something extreme, going on a meditation retreat, doing something like that's just simple stuff can really like set you straight. And so Hesse, with all of his works, can provide you that gateway into Eastern philosophy, into this kind of spirituality we see in Damien or Steppenwolf that is kind of like a building block to the psychedelic kind of free-flowing spiritual revolution. Whatever it is, it's clean writing. It's pre-psychedelic revolution writing, which I think is important because it's pre-technological writing. I think that the animistic spirit, that lived within us has now died because of technology mostly, and that older writers have that, and that's why we look at them. There's a word out there, it's called I'm being animate. People say I move my hands too much and I'm being too animate. I have too much energy. But animation is, much like what animism, right? We're giving a life to words. I'm giving life with my gestures. We're giving life to cartoons or whatever it is. And I feel like when I read Hesse, when I read a lot of these older classic novels, what they are providing me is a connection of reciprocity to the world and to family and to all these other things. Family drama, people have family dramas still, but in the flattened suburban life, many people don't have that. And now with the numbing up of technology and dad being like, yeah, as he's watching, I was walking my daughter in the stroller today, and some dad was his daughter was playing with the soccer ball alone. And this guy was my age, in early 30s, and he's just on the phone scrolling. He's not even playing with her. I'm like, oh my God, like we're numbing out. Like this is supposed to be, having kids is hard, but when you get to go out to the park and play a little bit of soccer and look around, that's something that's supposed to refresh you and give you more energy. It's this big moment, before I had a kid, I never took as many walks or went to the park as much, even though that's something that everyone should be doing for, their mental health and stuff and just to connect. And so anyway, I think that Hesse really dives into these topics and is a perfect gate to, deeper levels of revelation that aren't necessarily connected to what we have now been programmed with. Many of our conceptions of meditation, yoga, spirituality have been tainted by the psychedelic revolution, by modern, influencers with the chick with the sage and the mandala tapestry behind her, right? Like, there's like, I see, I don't have a phone. Your boy's got the flip phone right now, but, like a couple of years ago, I saw on Instagram like a reel like of some chick's room with like a bunch of crystals and mandalas and stuff, and it's like, if you see this, like leave immediately. And I was like, I wish I would have seen this 10 years ago because I made that mistake multiple times. Nonetheless, we think that that's it, but there's actually a whole trajectory that wasn't overtaken by the CIA. This whole the Grateful Dead, shout out the Grateful Dead, shout out Cosmic Charlie, shout out Europe 72, absolutely love it. There's this whole trajectory though of passivity and confusion that was the pipeline to yuppieism and to crazy shit like Jonestown that we didn't need to go down, that led also to the technological revolution we are in today. There was a pathway outside of that, and you could still tap into that a little bit through works like Hesse and many of the early occultists like Gurdjieff, P.D. Uspensky, Carl Jung, like some of these dudes that weren't in the world of technology but were trying to touch the miraculous. So shout out Hermann Hesse. I don't know why The Wind-Up Bird by Murakami is on this list, but I'm going to throw it down here at a B. Low B. I'm an absolute fan of Murakami. He's one of the GOATs. I added like 70 books to this, but I started with like 40 books from another person's list. And so, yeah, The Wind-Up Bird, awesome novel, awesome Japanese novel. And speaking of Japanese novels, let's do a quick segment where we rank 4 more. So Murakami, I'll throw up there at the B. I'm a huge fan. I'm going to do a ranking Murakami video very soon. So first up, we have The Tale of the Genji, which I'm going to throw up here at a high A. I feel like in terms of classics, The Tale of Genji is like one of the best I've ever read. That was one book that BookTube did help me get into, that I saw like the dudes holding it and being like, oh, the Japanese classic. And I was like, oh man, I got to read this one. Like, this is so important. That, funny enough, that was years ago, back like, barely when I started. And that made me realize like, oh, I was just talking about random things. If you go watch my early videos, I was talking about like writing motivation, then I'd be talking about Carl Jung, then I'd be talking about spiritual ecology. I was like very wide with what I was talking about, which was cool. But, I wasn't reaching that many people. And so then I realized like, oh wow, like I really like can like if I start talking about these classic novels that I've read and start like really kind of doubling down, this can be really important because this random dude who I don't even remember with like a crappy phone camera, no microphone, got me to read that book. And I was like, whoa. I'll let the Jungians and the psychology people talk about, books about the shadow and stuff like that, even though I love talking about all that and I could integrate that into my presentations still. But yeah, so Tale of the Genji, absolute A. Next we have Kokoro, which is basically like the Great Gatsby of Japan. It's the most widely read book in Japan. And so I'm going to throw that here at a C, behind the Great Gatsby, maybe a little bit. I'll actually put it one place above Tender is the Night and The Great Gatsby. And Kokoro is a nice novel, but overall, really, I think is just meant for the student. We read this last October in my book club alongside Murakami and Desai, and no one really liked this one as much, I think, outside of one of our members, Haley, as the other two novels. And in general, it fell a little bit flat. Everything with Sensei and, basically this lead up to all of his past memories really didn't feel like a big moment. Like I understand, I mean, it was big, but I could understand when you were young, kind of learning about your past and learning about these terrible events that have happened and why it's such a big deal and having this like late life melancholy and stuff because of it. I can understand that, but overall, it's a good novel, not that impactful. Next up on our Japanese list, we have Kobo Abe's Woman in the Dunes. I would throw this maybe at a high C, low B. I think that Abe, I actually have a video on Abe on this channel. Type in Right Conscious Kobo Abe if you guys like The Woman in the Dunes. It's about his favorite writing techniques. It's the only place anywhere online that you can find his thoughts on writing. He released some big book of letters and that I read through that I found like at a used bookstore, and I basically just wrote down all his major takes on writing. But The Woman in the Dunes is a good novel, very weird novel, like Sandy, like it's about a man that is like I think he's going on vacation, if I remember correctly, and he gets trapped down in this dune. There's like this group of people that are like enslaving people, and they're like basically just like getting sand and putting it in buckets, and I think like bringing it to the top or doing something like that. It's slave labor, and he's down there with the woman, and eventually he just gets like consumed into the world and becomes apathetic to his entire life. And other things happen, and it's like a pretty weird book. Like there's a scene after he's been in there for months where he has like sandy sex with her and lasts like 3 seconds. I just remember it's like that one will always stick with me for some weird reason. I would also place Yasunari's Kawabata, novel Snow Country, probably down here even low, a little bit above Kokoro. Once again, just kind of a sad, melancholic Japanese classic novel that's really, really nice. I like Kawabata's work, but definitely not kind of rising up into some of these higher levels. So next up we have The Lord of the Flies, which I am going to put probably down here in the low C category. Funny enough, Lord of the Flies was one of the only books that I could get my students to read during my last couple of years of teaching, especially the really bad classes. This was one of the books I had to bring out and like do all the interactive stuff with like survival and the hypothetical questions. There's like a really good free audiobook with all these like sounds going on that's a little bit more immersive for the students. One of the problems with audiobooks and students is that if you get some old British dude reading something, I'm trying to remember, like, we'll talk about a book, Things Fall Apart, that had a terrible British narrator. Like Slaughterhouse-Five had James Franco narrating it, and that was absolutely terrible. And so I try to read out loud a lot of the time, but with the classes that are really terrible that like make you want to rip your hair out, sometimes you just got to put the audiobook on to like give yourself a break for 15 minutes because you're going to be, as soon as they stop talking, you're going to be right back in it. And even when you're taught, one of the other problems being a teacher is that if you have a bad class and you're personally reading out loud, they literally will throw things at you, mess around, so you almost have to be watching. Plus, with the bad classes, there's usually a correlation between bad classes and general reading level and intellect, and Not to say that many of them are actually, many of the worst kids are very talented when it comes to thinking and like need actual stimulation or challenges, and they were never really taught to read by their parents, so they just have like too much excess energy. But they're also the worst classes, behavior wise, are coincidentally terrible at reading out loud, and like they're so bad at reading aloud that they like it's stammering, like they're like you can't even, like the whole class goes dead when like Johnny comes up and they flow over and he's like got to do an entire page. Oh my god. And then when kids realize that like you'll skip, like Johnny, it's okay, take a break, then they realize if they read bad, then it's like it turns into a joke to read as bad as they can, and then you can't say anything because of this 504s, and my son actually has ADHD. It's a whole thing, bro. So audiobooks, Lord of the Flies, but Lord of the Flies is interesting, but just once again one of these more simple novels. Next up, we have On the Road by Jack Kerouac, and I am going to throw On the Road up here in the, we got to do some readjusting. It's in the high C category. We're going to put it above Joseph Heller. Gabriel Garcia Marquez is definitely better than any of these authors down here. He kind of got lost for a little bit. Gabriel Garcia Marquez is definitely better than Kokoro and The Call of the Wild. So I like Jack Kerouac. Jack Kerouac had a big influence on me. I actually, after I read Dharma Bums, hitchhiked from Logan, Utah to Canada in an insane journey with many different things I've talked about before. Crazy synchronicity. Some of the craziest things that ever happened to me happened on that trip, including a man picking me up who had his family murdered by a hitchhiker. Like, I won't retell that one. If you go watch a lot of my videos, you'll hear me tell it a couple other times, but that one was insane. Anyway, though, as I've gotten older, though, Kerouac does seem to kind of fall out of favor with me. He wrote On the Road in just one draft, just one big push. There wasn't very much revision in it, and much like As I Lay Dying by William Faulkner, I think that suffers because of it. I think that a lot of the beat writing suffers because of it. I think a lot of the beat poetry does not suffer, whether it's Gary Snyder, Michael McClure, Allen Ginsberg, who did do a lot of revision, Jack Spicer. A lot of those, revision wasn't the biggest thing for many of them. And so I think that energy was really needed to kind of bridge into like postmodernism and to really like help poetry out. And, a lot of that was because of the integration of Eastern philosophy. But overall, Jack Kerouac isn't the strongest writer. I mean, he's pretty strong. I like him. I mean, he's had a lot of great. Now, I like his work, but like, I feel like back when I was younger, I'd be like, yeah, Jack Kerouac, and like people like really build him up as like, I don't know how many Jack London, marks are out there anymore, So yeah. Anyway, next up, we are reading Céline's Journey to the End of the Night, and talking about that. We're actually reading it next Saturday, 5 days from now, in the Right Conscious Book Club. This was actually the last book I just I finished. I got a lot of it done weeks and weeks ago, and then I was like needed to finish the last 70 or 80 pages, and so I just got that done. I like this novel. Interesting enough, on this last reread, I found it a little bleak. The book club is having a bleak month right now. I think we're reading Mishima, The Trial, Céline, and then a Cormac McCarthy novel this month. We read 4, and so it was a pretty dark month. And then as we're moving forward this year, things are going to become a little bit lighter. But I was laughing when I made the schedule that like you try to balance it, and I was just like, I guess this month of March we're just going to be super depressed. And I know someone in the club. Shout out to Kelly if she's made it this far, and she was like, "Man, this is all this is a lot." I'm like, "I know, man. I'm with you." I didn't think it would be so heavy. Anyway, so Céline, Journey to the End of the Night is this sprawling novel, basically going from World War II to colonial empires to America, and because of that, it's absolutely wonderful. It is really bleak. It is hard. The writing does feel a little bit flat in today's world, but that doesn't matter to me as much, especially with modern writing. It can feel like a slog at a time, but in terms of tragedy, I'm going to definitely have to throw Journey to the End of the Night up here in the high. We'll throw out the high B category for sure. Next up, we have All Quiet on the Western Front, which is obviously an awesome anti-war novel, but I think somewhat struggles compared to some of these other novels. What I love about this list is that it's so easy to rank them now, because I can just look at the quality now that things have been built out a little bit. I can say, yeah, this novel in terms of quality and impact is really going to fall into the kind of low B category here, in my opinion, probably coming behind a John Steinbeck for sure. Really awesome awesome book. I mean, one of these displays, there's a lot of great World War I novels, whether it's Passive Glory, The Man Without Qualities by Robert Musil, which those would rank higher. I'm talking, I could go on and on. We could talk about hundreds of novels here. The list could never end, but we'll bring in the quintessential kind of World War I novel, and that's where it's going to land for me. Next up, we have Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. This is kind of an odd cover, but this was the first one that came up. And so I'm going to rank Frankenstein probably a high B. It's going to come up here next to probably Don Quixote, which I'm going to put in front of Faulkner. Probably right up here in the kind of high B category. Absolutely wonderful novel. When you read the prose and what Shelley is doing, it feels like you're reading a modern novel. That's what shocked me most when I first read it. It can be a little flat and antiquated, at times, but overall reads wonderfully. And so, boom, Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I have a full video on Substack breaking down Frankenstein. I have entire theories that go against the typical AP essay. But yeah, moving forward. Next, we have Joseph Conrad, and I'm just going to, we could talk about Heart of Darkness or his collected works. I'm going to throw him up here in this kind of high C category, right behind, maybe right in front, Jack Kerouac. I like Joseph Conrad. I like some of his lesser read works I need to talk about. I was trying to make this video that I still need to release that probably won't do very well, titled 5 novels that prove how power really works, or I don't know the exact title, but I want to talk about novels that show corruption and power, that's crazy. And Conrad has a novel called Nostromo about a colonial mining project that's so good, really good when it comes to just showing colonial power and stuff like that. But I'll throw him in kind of this high C category, though. I think that Conrad, in terms of prose, he's one of these, once again, ideas are great, but the execution not as great. Very influential, though, obviously. So next up, we have Madame Bovary by Flaubert. And I'm going to throw this, we haven't had an A in a second. I'm going to throw this up here kind of for sure ahead of Hemingway, maybe even in front of Jane Austen. I think that Flaubert, in terms of style, is amazing, because when you look at Emma in this, I should say that Flaubert does a perfect job of basically showing what happens when you build a false construction out of your entire life. What happens when you're just being one of these people who's just fronting with, an aesthetic image, one could say. In the modern world, what happens when you are trying to become something, when you're trying to become a person of depth, and you think that you can get there without doing the actual work, and especially when you are trying to achieve a certain sense of transcendence or fame or whatever, which sometimes just can't be bought. It just sometimes happens. And, this is a kind of a modern thing that starts to happen. It was crazy. We were talking about Mark Twain earlier. I was reading some, stuff about Twain between filming that. It's a day or two later now. And they were saying that until the gold rush happened, no one ever worried about money in America. People worried and wanted to have a house and be successful, but no one was worried about extreme wealth or this aesthetic mind. And I think in Europe that had maybe the aesthetic mind had been built a little bit, but in America we had found kind of a break from it. And so it's interesting to see a lot of these European authors kind of talking about this as an American, especially earlier American fiction, and even in poetry, depending on the person, that didn't start to, I feel the commercial or the pull of the mind didn't start for a while. And as authors, we document that, right? We document kind of the darkness and kind of the depths that people in society are falling into, or even the author themselves. And so next up, we have Charlotte Bronte. And I'm not seeing Wuthering Heights on here, but I could put it on here, but I would place both novels. I would place both novels around here in the high B. They're not going to go ahead of Charles Dickens, that's for sure, or James Joyce. I'd put Jane Eyre and Charlotte Bronte's works, in the low B category. Next up, we have The Divine Comedy, if I can see that correctly. Some of these book titles are really, really small. I'm going to throw The Divine Comedy up here in the high B category for sure. I also want to switch David Copperfield and Great Expectations. That's the right ordering. Dickens is better than Camus. At the end of the video, I will readjust everything so that it looks perfect. I haven't read The Divine Comedy since I was in university a long time ago. The same could be said about Paradise Lost, partially because I just feel like they affect my poetic style personally as a writer, and it's something that I'm trying to break free from. A lot of the that period from Beowulf until modernism is obviously fun to read and awesome, but I am a fan of it, but I really think like if I'm going to be reading things, I know like read the classics and like I get it and I've read it all and I understand that it's good, but like for what I'm trying to like channel into my soul, it's something totally different. And when I do read stuff like that, it kind of they're working with different meters and lines and in a totally different world. And so it sometimes screws me up, and so I'm also somewhat resentful against Paradise Lost and the Divine Comedy because of the enforced evisceration of pagan poetry and pagan culture and the oral culture and everything that we had learned under forced conversion and other things that happened during that time, and all the wonderful stuff that could have been written if freedom was allowed. And thank God for Novalis and Holderlin and eventually William Blake and others for reviving it, but that entire period still is screwing poetry up. So I'll throw John Milton up there too. So I understand the merit, but if we're also talking about transformation and other things and like actual applicability, I mean, it definitely has a lot, but somewhat falls short. I mean, if you're not a hardline Christian or like a hardline like defender of the classics and the humanities, there's so much better poetry out there, depending on what area you want to touch. Once things were actually opened up again and authors were allowed to write. Next we have Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland. I'm gonna throw this down here at a C. Not my favorite novel of all time. I should say this is Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. Obviously very influential, but now nowhere near as epic as even in like the Chronicles of Narnia or like Lord of the Rings in terms of like oomph. Next up we have The Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann, and I'm going to throw that up here right above probably Siddhartha and Charlotte Bronte. I think that some of these images doubled, and so I'm trying to make sure that I'm not talking about the same book twice, but I really am a big fan of Thomas Mann and The Magic Mountain. I feel like he doesn't, on a prose level, he's way better than Hermann Hesse, but I also feel like the lessons aren't necessarily there, but The Magic Mountain is much longer, much denser, and I think that gives it more room to really push itself into the classic novel conversation. So next up we have a bunch of Russian authors. So my second to last video was ranking every Russian classic, so I'm just going to kind of throw them in here in context. And so first up we have The Master and Margarita, which I am going to put up here right next to Céline, which I feel like is a good ranking. I'm going to put Dead Souls up here, also in the high B category, probably up here, ahead, for sure ahead of like Kurt Vonnegut, near John Steinbeck. We have Hunger by Knut Hassmann, which is not a Russian novel, which is an absolutely wonderful novel that Robert Bly actually translated, and I first read when I was in Utah before I even knew who Robert Bly was. And funny enough, I reread a different translation that was better. I'm going to throw this up here behind Slaughterhouse-Five. This is also, Hunger's a great novel. Next up, we have Oblomov, which I'm going to throw a little bit higher on. I think it's better than Dead Souls, so I'm going to throw it up here. We'll put it in front. We'll put it near Faulkner. So keeping up with European classics, I'm going to rank Günter Grass's The Tin Drum up here at a pretty high B also. I'll put it in front of The Stranger. I'm a huge fan of Günter Grass's fiction, even though he was a Nazi, which that didn't come out for a really long time. But when I first read The Tin Drum, I was like, holy crap, what is this? Funny enough, my 8th grade teacher, Mr. Stewart, said he gave us a list of books to read one day when we were older that like, hey, you can't understand this now, but when you're an adult, you need to read these. And that was one of the first books on the list that I read when I was like 19 or 20. I was like, what? And I remember giving it to my dad, and he's like, what the hell am I reading? Next up, we're going to rank just, I think, 2, if not 3. I can only see 2 right now. There's so many different book names on here. 2 Latin American novels that are considered classics. First up, Pedro Paramo by Juan Rulfo. I'm going to throw this down here in the kind of C category, near Dostoevsky, a little bit ahead of 100 Years of Solitude. Very influential, a little bit sporadic, very influential on Gabriel Garcia Marquez and Bolaño and so many other authors. Can feel very scattered at times, so I'll throw it a little bit lower, actually. It can be a hard read. We're going to read this for the book club soon. I'm interested what people think. Another great novel is The Death of Artemio Cruz, which I'm going to throw up here, kind of up here in this kind of Magic Mountain Thomas Mann category. I feel like Carlos Fuentes, whether it's Aura or some of his other novels, is absolutely wonderful. I think he's a really good author, very underrated. He's kind of one of these authors that had some mental problems that I think really is good. And I think The Death of Artemio Cruz is one of the better displays of Latin American literature. Next up, we have Kate Chopin's The Awakening, a great story about, drowning. I'm going to throw this up here, probably in the low C category. Once again, it's a short book, not, I think, really only around 100 pages. It inspired Robert Stone's book, Children of Light. If I remember that title correctly, that's the only reason I read it in the first place. Even though it's a classic book, that's how I first kind of came across it. I thought it was cool. I thought, the messaging about women was nice, but I think the execution was, faltered a little bit. Next up, we have Henry James, and I think this one's a portrait of a lady. I'm going to throw James up here in the low A category, probably ahead of Madame Bovary, somewhat near Jane Austen. I'm not that big of a fan of Henry James's style. He is, of the American classic authors, really not my favorite at all. Like, I feel like it's a bore and a pain to read him a lot of the time. But you could also say that he was British. But nonetheless, I think that James is really not focused on like the spirit of life. And that's why I think for him, he's always fell flat for me. But I can objectively understand why he is a really good novelist. Honestly, screw that. We're throwing James down here. I'm not going to even go with the consensus. Let's throw James. We'll put him below. I'm going to put him below Kurt Vonnegut, everybody. Why, fuck it, everyone. Like, Henry James, sorry, bro. Like, if I don't like it, this is my ranking video. Like, sorry, Henry James. Like, not like worth the hype, but there's a lot of other authors like that I would focus on first. Speaking of which, let's throw Yukio Mishima in here. I thought that for Japanese novels, if we were going to do that, I'm going to throw Mishima up here with The Temple of the Golden Pavilion at a low A. I think that, honestly, a low A for sure. I think that when we're looking at this list, what Mishima does with The Temple of the Golden Pavilion, which is a little bit of a later work, so I know it's kind of unfair to throw it up with works that were written, decades before, especially novels in the 20th century. But in terms of aesthetic quality, it is a Japanese classic. In terms of its commentary on aesthetics and the philosophy of Eastern, I don't want to say nihilism, but Eastern hopelessness, inverse relationship and understanding of Buddhism and other things, absolutely wonderful. It's a story, it's based on a true story, and I think that's one of the reasons why Mishima, much like Shakespeare and other authors, really, Mishima shines because he doesn't have to worry about the plot. It's like Cormac McCarthy and Blood Meridian. When you get to base something off a true story and just have to write about it, you usually have more room for freedom, and because you don't have to worry about the plot as much. And I feel like Mishima got his entire philosophy and the highest levels of his style into The Temple of the Golden Pavilion. And that's why it's so influential on so many random people. Like, I just saw the rapper Young Lean say that he loves that book the other day. Like, what? But if you think about it, he's very interested in aesthetics and like stuff like that. And it's like, that's like the higher order thinking in that world. Next, we have Under the Volcano by Malcolm Lowry. I think that this is a underrated, underread classic. I'm going to throw this up here next to Frankenstein. I think that Malcolm Lowry is a genius. I recently talked about this book in a different video, but I remember being floored when I first read this. And I know people like Cormac McCarthy's was very inspired by this book also and actually stole lines from it. Next up, we have The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne. I'm going to throw this. I think this was better than a lot of the books we had to read in high school, but I'm going to throw it still in the high C category. I feel like it, thank God for like it inspiring Moby Dick and other things, but in general, I mean, very good writing, but I think, when I'm looking at the B category, can't fall that high. Next up, we have the African classic, one considered a classic, Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe, and I'm going to throw this down here in the D category, man. I had to read Things Fall Apart multiple times with my classes. I had to read it in high school, and it never works. The kids hate this novel. I remember when I was a substitute teacher going to classes where they were reading this, and they absolutely hated it. The only good part about reading this is there was a character in this named Akwefe, and all the kids would call her Akwefi. And like my wife and I would laugh so hard. We would talk about like, because they're farming yams and stuff over in Africa, and it's like a post-colonial novel. It really just doesn't strike to me though. Like all the elements are just, I would say, poorly written. It feels like disconnected, like the big payoffs, like nothing really comes across as that deep in my opinion, because I've read Ben Okri, I've read other African authors talking about colonialism realism and like they do a much better job than this. I don't know how this one became the high school canon, but it's terrible, man. But I used to make funny jokes about like, Conquo having a bunch of hoes in his shed, like, hose and hose. So anyway, that there was lots of jokes, but overall was, if like I remember this teacher, like she's like, I want to show like all these Mexican students like what Africa's like and introduce them to black people in like Africa. And like, that was her reasoning for doing it. I was like, dude, and then I was like, dude, they don't understand anything. This is not going to help. Like you could do something, I think, much better than this. Anyway, so definitely, it's considered a classic though. It's one of the more widely read novels on Africa ever, or based in Africa ever. So next we have Sister Carrie by Theodore Dreiser. I'm not the biggest fan of Dreiser, but I understand that he's definitely not in this lower category, so I'm going to put him up here. Put him up here, high mid C category. Next we have The Red Badge of Courage by Stephen Crane. I'm going to throw that up here, also in the mid C category. Next, we have Middlemarch by George Eliot, absolute masterpiece. I'm going to throw this up here in the kind of mid to low A category. I feel like, once again, this is one of these like classic uppity novels that does swing and hit its power. But for me personally, when I'm looking above it and I'm seeing, the trial, Mishima, Faulkner, it doesn't have the transformative qualities and the risk taking and some of the expansiveness and openness to reach there, even though I'm a big fan of it and I really need to reread it. I know my boy John Pistelli, author of Major Arcana, likes it because he kept mentioning it in the novel. So I've been seeing Middlemarch everywhere, and so I really need to actually do a reread on it, and we'll have to see my thoughts then. I'll probably make this video again in 3 or 4 years and we'll see, because for my last video where I did this, there have been some dramatic changes in some of my rankings. Next we have Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God. This was this was a book I liked to teach in high school, but once again kind of falling into this mid-C category. After that, we have The Canterbury Tales by Chaucer, if I am seeing that correctly. This is definitely A-tier literature. I'm going to put this up here, probably ahead of Jane Austen. The Canterbury Tales by Chaucer inspired Shakespeare, Lord of the Rings, everything, and is very readable still if you can get the language down. Even if you read an abridged version, like I had my mind blown reading this in full with a class with the professor that made us take multiple choice exams that were really hard. Like the first one, like I read it and took notes and was messing around, and on the first test I got a C, and I was like, dude, I'm getting an A in this class, I'm not getting a C. So I studied the shit out of it to make sure that I passed the remaining classes. There were no essays. This was the only high-level English class I've ever took, and maybe one of the only ones in the country where there were actually hardcore multiple choice exams. Like I think like maybe 25 to 30 questions on like niche topics like within the text that would mean that you had to read it deeply. Very, very odd class. A lot of people hated it, and I could see why, because a lot of people failed it. Like my buddy failed out of one of his classes, and I was like, I understood the challenge, but yeah, it was definitely very challenging. Shout out to that professor. Sorry, we're gonna start zooming in so I can actually see these book titles. Next up, we have Robinson Crusoe, which I probably read 12 or 13 years ago. I know it was very inspirational for Mark Twain and a lot of great literature. So it's feeling like a low B for me. I did enjoy reading it. It's probably, I should put, if I got to put Treasure Island on here, this, I could just keep adding. I feel like I like Treasure Island a little bit better than Robinson Crusoe, and I would throw both of those in the kind of the low B category, especially Robinson Crusoe for the influence. Next up, we have The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. I'm going to throw this in the low B category also. I like Oscar Wilde. It's a good novel. I also feel like it's a little bit over dramatic, a little bit navel-gazing. I've gone into a lot of these novels, if you watch other videos, much deeper, but we're hitting the point where like we still the video has to end at some point. Like I said, the next video will be ranking 1,000 novels. Every novel I've ever read. I've definitely read over 1,000 novels. It would take a while to compile that list, though. I don't even know if this thing could handle it. That will be a fun video.